Before our maps had borders, before history had a clear beginning, something extraordinary was already unfolding across the lands of the ancient Middle East. Beneath shifting deserts and buried cities lie discoveries that challenge what we thought early civilizations could achieve. Precision without modern tools, knowledge that seemed centuries ahead of its time. How did they build, calculate, and understand so much, so long ago? Were these cultures more advanced than we imagine? Or are we only now beginning to see the full picture? Let's step back into the dust of time and uncover what history may have hidden. High above the western shore of the Dead Sea, a vast plateau rises from the desert like a silent sentinel. Its cliffs drop sharply on all sides, isolating the summit from the world below. From a distance, Masada appears timeless, stone against sky, heat shimmering across its ancient walls. The air here is still, heavy with salt and memory. Nothing grows easily in this harsh landscape, and yet, more than 2,000 years ago, people chose this remote height as a place of refuge, power, and, ultimately, tragedy. Masada's story begins in the 1st century BCE, when King Herod the Great transformed the natural fortress into a royal stronghold. Known for his ambition and paranoia, Herod prepared Masada as a sanctuary against rebellion or invasion. He built massive defensive walls, elegant palaces cascading down the northern cliff, storerooms filled with supplies, and an advanced water system designed to capture and store the rare desert rains. Archaeology confirms the scale of his vision. This was not a temporary hideout, but a carefully engineered refuge meant to withstand siege for years. For decades, Masada stood largely unused. Then, in the year 66 CE, during the First Jewish-Roman War, a group of Jewish rebels seized the fortress. As Roman forces crushed resistance across the region, Masada became one of the final strongholds of defiance. Nearly 1,000 men, women, and children took shelter behind its walls. The Romans responded with methodical determination. They established camps at the base of the plateau, remains of which are still visible today, and began constructing an enormous siege ramp on the western side. Even now, the ramp is one of the most striking features of the site. A massive slope of earth and stone, built by human labor under harsh desert conditions. Archaeological evidence confirms the scale of the Roman effort, a reminder of the empire's relentless reach. According to the ancient historian Josephus, when Roman forces finally breached the fortress in 73 or 74 CE, they discovered something unexpected. Rather than surrender, the defenders had chosen death. Josephus describes a collective act in which the rebels destroyed their possessions, drew lots, and killed one another to avoid capture. When the Romans entered, only a handful of survivors remained to tell the story. For many, this account defines Masada, a symbol of resistance and sacrifice. Excavations in the 1960s uncovered burned structures, storage jars, Roman camps, and small clay ostraca, some bearing names. One fragment carries the name Ben Yair, the leader Josephus described. To some, these findings seem to support the ancient narrative. And yet, questions remain. Archaeologists found far fewer human remains than Josephus's account might suggest. Some scholars argue that the mass suicide may have been exaggerated, reshaped by Josephus for dramatic or political effect. Others wonder whether the final moments were more chaotic, less organized than the story implies. Did everyone truly choose the same fate? Or were there multiple endings, lost to time? There are other mysteries as well. The defenders appear to have maintained a structured community during the siege, complete with ritual spaces and careful food storage. How did daily life continue under such pressure? And what of the psychological reality? Months, perhaps years, of isolation while Roman forces built their way steadily upward? Even the landscape itself invites speculation. Masada's preservation is remarkable. The dry desert air has protected wood, textiles, and organic materials rarely seen elsewhere. Some researchers suggest that undiscovered chambers or hidden storage areas may still exist beneath collapsed structures. Others point to gaps in the archaeological record, areas too fragile or inaccessible to fully excavate. Standing on the summit today, the silence is striking. The Roman camps below form a quiet circle, as if the siege never truly ended. Wind moves through the ruins of Herod's palaces. Broken walls cast long shadows across the stone. Masada is often presented as a completed story, a place where history reached a dramatic and final conclusion. But the evidence, like the desert itself, is incomplete. Between the lines of ancient texts and the fragments unearthed from the ground, uncertainty remains. What truly happened in those final hours? How much of the story is memory? How much interpretation? And beneath the dust and stone, what traces of human choice, fear, hope, or resistance might still be waiting to be found? If Masada leaves us with questions about memory, survival, and the stories history chooses to preserve, our journey now moves east, into the rugged mountains of western Iran, where another message from the ancient world has endured. But here, the mystery is not only what was written, it is how such a thing was ever created at all. Carved high into a sheer limestone cliff along the ancient road between Babylon and Ecbatana, the Behistun Inscription rises more than 100 meters above the ground. From below, it appears distant and almost unreachable, a vast panel of figures and text etched into the mountainside, exposed to wind, rain, and centuries of silence. Even today, standing at the base of the cliff, the scale feels improbable. The carvings seem less like a monument built by human hands, and more like a message placed where only time itself could guard it. The inscription was commissioned around 520 BCE by Darius I, king of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. It tells the story of his rise to power, his defeat of rebels, his claim to legitimacy, and his authority over a vast and diverse realm. The narrative is written in 3 languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. Together, they form one of the most important historical records of the ancient Near East. At the center of the relief, Darius stands tall, 1 foot placed upon a defeated rival. Before him, a line of bound prisoners represents the leaders of revolts across the empire. Above them all, a winged symbol, often interpreted as a divine presence, watches over the scene. To historians, the inscription is invaluable. Like the Rosetta Stone, it helped unlock the secrets of ancient writing. In the 19th century, British officer Henry Rawlinson risked his life climbing the cliff face, copying the texts while suspended by ropes and narrow ledges. His work allowed scholars to decipher cuneiform, opening a window into civilizations that had been silent for millennia. But beyond its historical importance lies a more practical mystery, one that becomes harder to ignore the longer the monument is studied. How was it made? The Behistun panel sits on a nearly vertical rock face, far above any natural platform. There is no clear evidence of scaffolding holes or construction supports. The cliff below offers little space for stable footing. And yet the carvings are precise, deliberate, and extensive, covering more than 1,000 square meters of stone. Some researchers believe a system of wooden scaffolding was constructed and later removed, leaving few traces. Others suggest that workers carved footholds or temporary ledges into the rock as they progressed upward, smoothing them away once the work was complete. But questions remain. The height, the scale, and the level of detail would have required not only skilled artisans, but careful planning, coordination, and long-term stability in a difficult environment. How were materials lifted? How were workers protected from falling? How long did the project take, and what kind of workforce would have been needed to sustain it? There is also the matter of preservation. The inscription has endured for more than 2,500 years, exposed to weather, earthquakes, and erosion. In some areas, the surface remains remarkably clear. Was the location chosen specifically to protect the text from vandalism and decay, or did the height serve another purpose, ensuring that the message would be seen not by individuals up close, but as a permanent symbol of power visible from afar? Some alternative theories go further. A few have suggested that the site may have held earlier carvings, modified or expanded during Darius's reign. Others question whether ancient construction techniques were more advanced than we currently understand. Lost methods of large-scale stonework adapted to extreme terrain. There are even more speculative ideas. Why place such a detailed text where it could not easily be read? Was the primary audience human travelers below? Or was the act of carving itself a symbolic offering, to the gods, to eternity, or to the authority of the king beyond the reach of ordinary people? Standing at the base of the Behistun cliff today, the feeling is unmistakable. The figures are distant, almost ghost-like against the stone. The words that once reshaped our understanding of ancient languages remain physically out of reach for most visitors. The monument communicates power, permanence, and distance, all at once. Modern technology, drones, digital imaging, laser scanning, has allowed researchers to study the inscription more closely than ever before. Yet even with these tools, the practical reality of its creation still raises quiet doubts. Replicating such a project today, on an exposed vertical surface, would require complex engineering, safety systems, and significant resources. And still, more than 2 millennia ago, it was done. The Behistun Inscription is often described as a historical document, but it is also a demonstration of organization, ambition, and technical confidence in a world we are still learning to understand. Was it simply the result of determined labor and lost construction methods? Or does it hint at capabilities, planning techniques, or logistical knowledge that we have only partially reconstructed from the past? High above the ancient road, the carved figures remain where they have always been, watching, silent and distant. Their message has been translated, their story recorded. But the greater question may still linger in the stone itself. Not just what they wrote, but how they reached a place where writing seemed almost impossible at all. If the silent ruins of Qaryat al-Faw reveal how entire cities can vanish into the desert, our journey now moves north to a place where history did not disappear quietly. Here, civilizations did not simply fade, they collided, and layer upon layer, their stories accumulated into a single hill rising from a broad and fertile plain. In northern Palestine, overlooking the wide expanse of the Jezreel Valley, stands the ancient mound of Megiddo. From a distance, it appears unremarkable, a low, rounded hill shaped by time and wind. But this is no natural formation. Megiddo is a tell, a mound built from the remains of cities destroyed, rebuilt, and destroyed again over thousands of years. More than 20 layers of human occupation lie stacked beneath its surface, each one a chapter in a long and often violent history. The location explains its importance. Megiddo sits beside one of the ancient world's most critical trade and military routes, a corridor connecting Egypt to Mesopotamia and the great empires beyond. Whoever controlled Megiddo controlled movement, commerce, and power across the region. For centuries, armies marched through this valley, and often they stopped here. Archaeology confirms what ancient records suggest. Megiddo was a battlefield again and again. Egyptian inscriptions describe a decisive victory here in the 15th century BCE, when Pharaoh Thutmose III defeated a coalition of Canaanite rulers. Later layers reveal destruction by fire, hurried rebuilding, and new fortifications, evidence of repeated conflict and sudden change. But Megiddo is more than a record of war. Excavations have uncovered massive city gates, palaces, temples, and a sophisticated water system carved deep into the bedrock. One of the most remarkable features is a subterranean tunnel more than 70 meters long, leading to a hidden water source outside the city walls. The engineering required to cut such a passage through solid stone suggests careful planning, skilled labor, and a level of organization not always associated with the ancient world. Even more debated are the large stone structures once identified as stables, long halls with stone pillars and feeding troughs. Early archaeologists linked them to the biblical King Solomon, describing a powerful kingdom capable of maintaining hundreds of horses and chariots. Later research has challenged this interpretation, suggesting the buildings may have served other purposes or belonged to a later period. This uncertainty points to one of Megiddo's deeper mysteries: chronology itself. Dating the layers of the site has been the subject of ongoing debate for decades. Small differences in timing, sometimes as little as a century, can reshape our understanding of entire kingdoms, shifting the scale of ancient power and influence. Was Megiddo truly the center of a vast, centralized state during the early Iron Age? Or was its importance more regional, its grandeur interpreted through later traditions? Beneath the scientific questions lies another layer of intrigue, one that has shaped the site's reputation far beyond archaeology. Megiddo is the place from which the word Armageddon is derived. In the Book of Revelation, it is named as the gathering place for a final cosmic battle at the end of days. For centuries, this association has transformed the quiet mound into a symbol of ultimate conflict, where history, prophecy, and imagination converge. Scholars emphasize that the biblical reference likely reflects the site's long military history rather than predicting a specific future event. Yet the idea has endured. Visitors often arrive with a sense that Megiddo is more than an archaeological site, that it is somehow charged with symbolic weight, shaped not only by what happened there, but by what people believe might happen again. Some have suggested that Megiddo's repeated destruction and rebuilding created the conditions for this enduring myth. Few places in the ancient world experienced so many cycles of conflict. To those living in later periods, the site may have represented the ultimate battlefield, a place where decisive struggles had always taken place. There are also practical mysteries that remain unresolved. Despite more than a century of excavation, large portions of the tell remain unexplored. Modern archaeologists now work more slowly and carefully, preserving what remains rather than exposing everything at once. Advanced techniques, ground-penetrating radar, microarchaeology, environmental analysis, suggest that entire neighborhoods, industrial areas, or administrative complexes may still lie buried beneath unexcavated layers. Then there is the question of daily life. The ruins reveal monumental architecture and evidence of elite activity, but the experiences of ordinary people are harder to reconstruct. How did they live through repeated wars and destructions? How quickly did they rebuild? What social systems allowed the city to recover again and again? Standing on the summit today, the view stretches across the Jezreel Valley in every direction. The landscape appears calm: green fields, distant roads, quiet movement. It is difficult to imagine the armies that once gathered here, the smoke rising from burning walls, the cycles of collapse and renewal that built the hill beneath your feet. And yet, every layer below tells the same story: power gained, power lost, and the constant struggle to control a place that seemed to invite conflict. Megiddo is often presented as a key to understanding ancient warfare, biblical history, or the rise and fall of early states. But it is also something more elusive, a place where physical evidence, historical memory, and symbolic meaning overlap in ways that are not always easy to separate. How many stories remain hidden in the layers that have yet to be uncovered? How many assumptions about kings, kingdoms, and battles will change as new evidence emerges? And after thousands of years as a crossroads of conflict, does Megiddo represent a completed chapter of history? Or is it a reminder that some places carry meanings that continue to evolve long after the last city has fallen and the dust has settled? If Megiddo reveals how layers of conflict can shape a place's destiny, our journey now turns to a different kind of mystery, one not defined by war, but by survival. Far from fertile valleys and ancient crossroads, deep within the Arabian Peninsula lies a city that seems to defy its environment, a place where life once flourished, in a landscape that today appears almost incapable of sustaining it. At the edge of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, one of the largest and harshest sand deserts on Earth, the ruins of Qaryat al-Faw stretch quietly across a dry valley. The land is wide and exposed, marked by heat, wind, and long seasons without rain. From a distance, the site blends into the desert itself. Low stone outlines, scattered foundations, and the faint geometry of streets long abandoned. And yet, more than 2,000 years ago, this was not an isolated outpost. It was a thriving city. Archaeological evidence shows that Qaryat al-Faw was occupied from around the 4th century BCE to the early centuries CE. It served as the capital of the ancient kingdom of Kinda and stood at a strategic point along major trade routes that connected southern Arabia to the north. Caravans carrying incense, spices, textiles, and precious goods once passed through this settlement, transforming it into a commercial and cultural hub in the middle of an unforgiving landscape. Excavations have revealed an organized urban plan: residential districts, markets, temples, burial grounds, and administrative buildings. Houses were built from stone and mud brick, some with multiple rooms arranged around central courtyards. Wells and underground water systems suggest careful management of scarce resources. Inscriptions written in ancient South Arabian scripts have been found carved into stone and painted onto walls, offering glimpses of names, beliefs, and daily life. The discoveries challenge a long-standing assumption that the deep interior of Arabia was largely empty in antiquity. Qaryat al-Faw tells a different story, one of stability, planning, and long-term settlement. But this raises the first and perhaps most fundamental mystery. How did such a city survive here at all? Water, the most critical resource, appears to have come from underground aquifers and seasonal runoff from nearby highlands. Archaeologists have identified irrigation channels and storage systems, suggesting a level of environmental knowledge and engineering adapted to extreme conditions. Yet the scale of the settlement implies reliability over generations. Fields were cultivated, animals were kept, trade was sustained. Was the climate slightly wetter during this period? Some researchers believe that subtle environmental shifts may have made the region more hospitable than it is today. Others argue that the inhabitants possessed highly efficient water management techniques that have since been lost. The desert around Qaryat al-Faw still holds traces of ancient agricultural activity, patterns in the soil, faint lines of former canals, but the full system that supported the city remains only partially understood. Then there is the question of its sudden decline. By the late centuries CE, the city was abandoned. There is no clear evidence of large-scale destruction by war. No single catastrophic event has been identified. Instead, the settlement appears to have faded, its population gradually dispersing until the desert reclaimed the streets and courtyards. What caused this disappearance? Climate change is one possibility. Even small shifts in rainfall or groundwater levels could have made agriculture unsustainable. Trade routes may have shifted, reducing the city's economic importance. Political changes elsewhere in Arabia could have weakened regional networks. but the archaeological record leaves gaps. Some buildings appear to have been left intact. Certain areas show signs of abrupt abandonment, as if daily life simply stopped. Another layer of intrigue lies in the cultural complexity of the site. Inscriptions and artifacts suggest a society influenced by multiple traditions: South Arabian, North Arabian, and even broader Near Eastern connections. Religious practices appear diverse, with temples dedicated to different deities and burial customs that changed over time. This blending of cultures raises questions about Qaryat al-Faw's role. Was it merely a trade station? Or something more? A cultural crossroads? A regional capital whose influence extended farther than currently recognized? More speculative ideas have also emerged. Some researchers have suggested that the city's water system may have relied on underground channels or natural geological features not yet fully mapped. Others point to unexplored areas beneath the surrounding sands, where satellite imaging hints at buried structures, roads, or agricultural zones far larger than the excavated core. The desert is constantly shifting. Sandstorms expose and conceal features from year to year. What we see today may represent only a fraction of the original settlement. Standing at the site now, the silence is profound. The streets lead nowhere. Doorways open onto empty courtyards. Wind moves through spaces where voices once echoed, where trade was negotiated, where families lived their daily lives far from any obvious source of security. Qaryat al-Faw challenges modern assumptions about ancient Arabia, not only about where people lived, but about what they were capable of sustaining. To build a functioning city in such an environment required knowledge, organization, and long-term planning that we are only beginning to reconstruct. Could such a settlement be created here again today, without modern technology? Could the same balance between water, trade, and environment be achieved under natural conditions alone? Much of the site remains unexcavated. Beneath layers of sand may lie additional neighborhoods, administrative centers, or infrastructure that could change our understanding of how the city functioned and why it ultimately vanished. For now, Qaryat al-Faw remains a quiet contradiction, a city that prospered where survival seems unlikely and then disappeared without leaving a clear explanation. In the vast stillness of the empty quarter, the ruins suggest a question that archaeology has not yet answered. Did the desert claim the city? Or did the people of Qaryat al-Faw leave behind knowledge about water, climate, and survival that has yet to be rediscovered beneath the sand? If Qaryat al-Faw leaves us wondering how a city could quietly fade back into the desert, our journey now moves to a place where the end may have come not slowly, but in a single violent moment. Here, in the fertile lands east of the Jordan River, the ground itself appears to carry the memory of an event so sudden and intense that even today, its cause is still debated. Rising above the eastern edge of the Jordan Valley is a broad archaeological mound known as Tel el-Hammam. From a distance, it looks like many ancient tells across the Middle East, a layered hill formed by centuries of rebuilding, abandonment, and renewal. The surrounding landscape is rich and green compared to the deserts we have just left behind. In antiquity, this region was well-watered, fertile, and strategically positioned near important trade routes. For thousands of years, people lived here. Excavations suggest that Tel el-Hammam was one of the largest and most significant Bronze Age cities in the southern Levant. At its height, during the Middle Bronze Age, around 3,600 years ago, the city was fortified with massive defensive walls, towers, gates, and an organized urban layout. Residential districts, administrative buildings, and evidence of long-distance trade point to a thriving and influential center. Then, suddenly, everything changed. Archaeologists studying the site have identified a distinctive destruction layer dating to around 1650 BCE. Across the upper surfaces of the city, there are signs of intense heat. far beyond what is typically seen in warfare or accidental fires. Mud bricks appear melted or partially vitrified. Pottery is fused and deformed. In some areas, building materials seem to have been exposed to temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Celsius. More unusual still are the small details embedded within the debris. Tiny fragments of melted metal, spherules, microscopic beads formed when material is rapidly vaporized and then cools in midair. Shocked quartz, a mineral structure often associated with high-pressure events, and scattered across the layer, a concentration of salt far higher than normal for the region. The pattern suggests not just destruction, but extreme, instantaneous energy. The question is, what could have caused it? One explanation is warfare. Ancient cities were often burned during conquest. But typical siege fires do not generate the temperatures required to melt pottery, liquefy mud brick, or create high-temperature spherules across such a wide area. Nor do they account for the apparent directional pattern of debris: walls blown outward, structures collapsed as if struck by a powerful blast. Another possibility is an earthquake followed by fire. The Jordan Valley lies along a major fault system, but seismic activity alone cannot explain the evidence of intense heat, nor the unusual mineral signatures found in the destruction layer. In recent years, a more dramatic theory has gained attention: that Tel el-Hammam was destroyed by a cosmic airburst, an explosion in the atmosphere caused by a meteor or comet fragment, similar to the Tunguska event over Siberia in 1908. According to this hypothesis, a celestial object entered the atmosphere at high speed and exploded several kilometers above the city. The resulting shock wave and thermal radiation could have produced temperatures high enough to melt materials, flatten structures, and ignite widespread fires, all within seconds. Some researchers point to the presence of high-temperature minerals and unusual elemental concentrations as possible supporting evidence. Others note that the pattern of destruction appears consistent with a directional blast rather than a ground-level fire. But the airburst theory is not universally accepted. Critics argue that some of the materials cited as evidence could be produced by more conventional processes, including industrial contamination during excavation or misinterpretation of naturally occurring features. Others question whether the available data is sufficient to confirm an extraterrestrial event. And yet, the mystery persists. Following the destruction, the area around Tel el-Hammam appears to have been largely abandoned for several centuries. Settlements in the surrounding region declined or disappeared. Some researchers suggest that high salt levels in the soil, possibly deposited during the event, may have made agriculture difficult for generations. The suddenness of the city's end, combined with the long period of regional decline, has led to another, more controversial idea. Some have proposed that Tel el-Hammam may be connected to ancient traditions describing a catastrophic destruction of cities in this region. These interpretations move beyond archaeology into the realm of historical memory and cultural narrative. Scholars remain divided, and many caution against directly linking physical evidence to specific ancient texts. Still, the possibility raises a broader question. Could extraordinary natural events leave impressions not only in the soil, but in human memory as well? Standing at Tel el-Hammam today, the landscape appears calm and ordinary. Fields stretch across the valley. The Tel rises quietly above the plain. There is no visible sign of catastrophe, only layers of earth and stone carefully exposed by excavation. But within those layers lies evidence of something unusual. A moment when heat, pressure, and force reshaped a thriving city in an instant. Modern science has identified similar airburst events elsewhere in the world, but they remain rare and unpredictable. Even today, such an explosion over a populated area would be devastating and nearly impossible to prevent. If the airburst theory is correct, Tel el-Hammam may represent one of the earliest known examples of a natural cosmic disaster affecting human civilization. If it is not, then the site still holds an unanswered question. What earthly force could generate such extreme conditions across an entire city? Much of the Tel remains unexcavated. New analytical techniques continue to test samples, refine dates, and challenge earlier conclusions. Each season adds pieces to the puzzle, but no single explanation has resolved every anomaly. Tel el-Hammam reminds us that ancient cities did not only face threats from war or decline. Sometimes the forces that shaped history came from beyond human control, or perhaps beyond our current understanding. Beneath the quiet soil of the Jordan Valley, the evidence of a sudden violent moment still waits to be fully explained. Was this the result of a rare cosmic event that struck without warning? Or does the destruction of Tel el-Hammam point to a phenomenon we have not yet learned how to recognize in the archaeological record? If Tel el-Hammam leaves us confronting the possibility of sudden catastrophe, of cities erased in a moment, our journey now turns to a different kind of mystery, not one of destruction alone, but of disappearance, rediscovery, and survival against the odds. In northern Mesopotamia, near the modern borderlands of Syria and Turkey, an ancient mound holds traces of a culture that seemed to emerge with unexpected sophistication, and then quietly fade from view. This is Tel Halaf. Rising from the flat plains near the Khabur River, the site appears at first like many other tells of the Near East, a broad, low hill formed by thousands of years of human occupation layered one upon another. The surrounding landscape is dry but fertile enough to support early agriculture, and in antiquity, this region lay along important routes connecting Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and the Levant. But what makes Tel Halaf remarkable is not its location alone. It is the civilization buried within it, one of the earliest complex cultures in northern Mesopotamia, flourishing more than 7,000 years ago. The Halaf culture, named after this site, dates to roughly 6,000 to 5,000 BCE. Archaeological excavations have revealed finely crafted painted pottery, delicate figurines, and distinctive architectural forms. The pottery, in particular, is striking, thin-walled, symmetrical, and decorated with intricate geometric and animal designs in multiple colors. Even by later standards, the craftsmanship appears advanced. The question that has long intrigued archaeologists is how such a refined artistic tradition developed so early and over such a wide geographic area. Halaf-style pottery has been found across large parts of northern Mesopotamia and beyond, suggesting either extensive cultural exchange or a surprisingly connected network of communities during a very early period of settled life. Yet, there is little evidence of strong centralized political authority. Instead, the Halaf world appears to have consisted of relatively small villages sharing a common material culture. How did these distant communities maintain such consistency in design, technique, and style? Was knowledge passed through traveling artisans, through trade networks, or through cultural traditions that spread more efficiently than we currently understand? At Tel Halaf itself, excavations uncovered another unusual feature: circular buildings known as tholoi. These structures, made of mud brick or stone, often stood alongside more conventional rectangular houses. Some appear to have been storage facilities, others perhaps living spaces or communal structures. Their purpose remains debated. Why circular architecture in a region where rectangular forms would later dominate? Were these buildings practical, symbolic, or connected to social or ritual activities that left little trace in the archaeological record? As centuries passed, the Halaf culture gradually transformed into the later Ubaid cultural horizon. The transition appears relatively peaceful, no clear signs of invasion or collapse. Instead, pottery styles changed, settlement patterns shifted, and new social structures emerged. But what drove this change? Environmental pressures? Population movements? Cultural assimilation? Or a slow internal evolution that left few dramatic markers for archaeologists to follow? Tel Halaf's story does not end in prehistory. Thousands of years later, during the early first millennium BCE, the site became the center of an Aramean kingdom known as Gazana. From this later period come some of the site's most dramatic discoveries: massive stone sculptures, guardian figures, and decorated orthostats, carved stone panels that once lined palace walls. These sculptures are powerful and imposing: lions, mythological creatures, and human figures rendered in a bold, distinctive style. When they were first uncovered in the early 20th century by German archaeologist Max von Oppenheim, they revealed a regional artistic tradition that blended influences from Assyria, Anatolia, and local cultures. Yet the sculptures themselves carry their own mysteries. Some appear unfinished. Others were deliberately buried or reused in later construction. Were they hidden for protection during times of conflict? Were they part of a ritual closure of earlier structures? Or do they reflect political changes that reshaped the identity of the city? The modern history of the site adds another layer of uncertainty. Many of the sculptures were transported to Berlin and displayed in a dedicated museum. But during World War II, the building was heavily damaged by bombing and fire. The basalt statues shattered into thousands of fragments. For decades, they were believed lost beyond recovery. Only in recent years have conservators painstakingly reassembled many of the pieces, using advanced restoration techniques to reconstruct figures that had been broken and scattered for more than half a century. The process itself has raised new questions about what was original, what was restored, and how closely the reconstructed forms match their ancient appearance. Meanwhile, at the site itself, large areas of Tel Halaf remain unexcavated. Political instability in the region has limited sustained archaeological work. Remote sensing and earlier surveys suggest that substantial portions of the ancient settlement still lie buried beneath the mound. There are also environmental questions. Evidence indicates that the Kabur River system has shifted over time. Changes in water availability may have influenced settlement patterns repeatedly across millennia. But the precise relationship between environmental change and the rise or decline of occupation at Tel Halaf remains only partially understood. Standing at the site today, the mound appears quiet and unremarkable. The wind moves across open fields. The layers of habitation, from Neolithic villages to Iron Age palaces, remain largely hidden beneath the surface. Tel Halaf challenges the idea that early societies developed slowly and uniformly. Instead, it suggests moments of sudden cultural sophistication, wide regional connections without centralized control, and transitions that occurred without clear signs of crisis. How did such early communities achieve such refined craftsmanship and cultural cohesion? Why did their distinctive traditions fade without dramatic evidence of collapse? And how much of their social, symbolic, and technological knowledge remains invisible to archaeology? Beneath the layered soil of Tel Halaf, entire chapters of human development may still be waiting. Fragments of a story about early complexity that does not fit neatly into familiar models of ancient progress. And as restoration continues and excavation slowly resumes, one question remains quietly at the center of the site's long history. Are we rediscovering a civilization that was simply forgotten, or are we only beginning to see traces of a cultural world whose full scale and influence have yet to be understood? If Tel Halaf reminds us how entire cultures can fade quietly into the soil, our journey now follows a different kind of trace, one that was never buried, yet remained almost unnoticed for centuries. Across the high deserts of southern Jordan, a line of stone stretches over the landscape, not hidden beneath the earth, but drawn across it like a boundary whose purpose has long been forgotten. This is Khatt Shebib. From the ground, the structure is difficult to grasp. In many places, it appears as little more than a low, broken wall, stones piled roughly, rarely rising more than a meter high. But from above, its true scale becomes visible. The wall runs for more than 150 kilometers, cutting across hills, valleys, and barren plateaus. It moves in long, straight segments, then bends, divides, and reconnects, as if following a logic that is not immediately obvious. Unlike the great defensive walls of antiquity, Khatt Shebib is modest in construction. There are no massive fortifications, no towers large enough for soldiers, no clear gateways or defensive platforms. In some sections, small stone enclosures, often called towers or cells, sit along the wall at irregular intervals. Their purpose remains uncertain. The first mystery is simple, yet profound. Why build such a long wall, if it was never meant to defend against anything? Archaeological surveys suggest that the structure may date to the Nabatean or early Roman period, roughly 2,000 years ago. The Nabateans, known for their capital at Petra, controlled trade routes across much of the region. They were skilled engineers, capable of managing water systems and building infrastructure suited to harsh desert conditions. One theory proposes that Khatt Shebib marked a boundary, separating cultivated lands from pastoral territory, or defining zones of administrative or economic control. The wall may have helped regulate the movement of herds, protecting agricultural areas from grazing animals. Another possibility is that it served as a territorial marker, a visible statement of ownership across a wide and sparsely populated landscape. In a region where natural boundaries are often unclear, a long stone line might have carried political or symbolic meaning even without strong physical enforcement. Yet the structure raises practical questions. Constructing a wall over such a distance would have required organization, labor, and long-term planning. The stones were gathered locally and stacked without mortar, following the contours of the land. In some places, the wall splits into parallel lines, forming narrow corridors. In others, it abruptly changes direction without any obvious geographical reason. If the goal was simply to mark territory, why such complexity? If it was meant to manage animals, why the changes in width and alignment? And if it was symbolic, what message was important enough to carve across more than 100 kilometers of desert? The small enclosures along the wall add another layer of uncertainty. Some are circular, others rectangular. A few may have served as lookout points, storage areas, or temporary shelters. But many are too small or too isolated to suggest regular occupation. Were they part of a coordinated system? Waypoints for workers during construction? Stations for monitoring movement across the boundary? Or do they represent different phases of use, added over time as the wall's function evolved? Dating the structure has also proven difficult. Unlike major settlements, Khatt Shebib contains little organic material for precise analysis. Pottery fragments found nearby suggest activity during the Nabatean and Roman periods. But whether the wall was built all at once or gradually extended remains unclear. Some researchers believe the project may have been constructed in segments by local communities rather than a centralized authority. Others suggest a more organized effort, possibly linked to regional administration or trade management. More speculative ideas have also emerged. Because the wall does not appear suited for defense, some have wondered whether its purpose was primarily symbolic, perhaps marking a cultural boundary between settled and nomadic populations. In ancient landscapes, visible lines could carry social meaning, shaping patterns of movement and interaction without requiring physical enforcement. Satellite imagery has revealed additional features near the wall: ancient field systems, animal traps known as desert kites, and faint tracks that may represent old routes. These surrounding elements hint at a complex human landscape, one in which Khatt Shebib may have played a role that is not yet fully understood. There is also the question of time. How long was the wall actually in use? Did it function for generations, or was it abandoned shortly after completion? In many places, erosion and stone removal have reduced it to scattered traces, Local populations over the centuries may have reused its stones for other purposes, gradually erasing parts of the original structure. Standing beside one of the remaining segments today, the wall feels almost incidental, too low to impress, too simple to suggest grand ambition. And yet, when viewed from the air, its scale becomes undeniable. Someone chose this line. Someone committed the labor to draw it across the land, kilometer after kilometer, stone after stone. Modern technology allows us to map the wall in detail, tracing its full length in ways that ancient builders could never have seen. But understanding its purpose remains more difficult than documenting its form. What kind of society invests in a structure that does not dominate the landscape but quietly organizes it? What needs or beliefs could justify such an extended boundary in a region where population density was low and resources limited? Khatt Shebib challenges the way we think about ancient construction. Not every large project was a fortress, a monument, or a symbol of power meant to inspire awe. Some may have shaped daily life in quieter ways, guiding movement, defining space, or expressing social order across vast distances. And still, many questions remain unanswered. Large portions of the wall have not been systematically surveyed. New remote sensing techniques continue to reveal previously unknown segments and associated features hidden in the desert. The line across the landscape endures, faint but persistent, a human decision preserved in stone long after its purpose was forgotten. In the open silence of the Jordanian plateau, Khatt Shebib stretches toward the horizon, a boundary without a clear meaning, a structure too large to ignore and too subtle to easily explain. Was it a practical solution to managing land and resources? Or does this long, quiet wall reflect a system of control, identity, or belief that we have not yet learned how to see? If Khatt Shebib leaves us contemplating boundaries drawn across the open desert, lines whose meaning has faded with time, our journey now moves toward a place where the mystery is not a wall or a structure, but a voice. A message written thousands of years ago, preserved by accident, and carrying echoes of beliefs, fears, and visions that still challenge our understanding. In the Jordan Valley, where the land dips below sea level and seasonal rivers shape the fertile plains, a low mound rises quietly above the surrounding fields. This is Tel Deir Alla. At first glance, it appears modest. Another ancient tell layered with the remains of settlements built and rebuilt over centuries. But beneath its soil, archaeologists uncovered something rare. Not just the ruins of buildings, but fragments of a written narrative unlike any other found in the region. The site has been occupied since the Bronze Age, but its most remarkable discovery dates to the 8th century BCE. During excavations in the late 1960s, researchers uncovered plaster fragments scattered across the floor of a collapsed building. At first, the pieces seemed insignificant, broken, faded, and covered in dirt. But as they were cleaned and assembled, faint lines of red and black ink began to emerge. What appeared was a text, painted on a wall rather than carved in stone. The writing was in an ancient script related to Aramaic, but its content was unexpected. It described the visions of a figure named Balaam, son of Beor, identified as a seer, a man who claimed to receive messages from divine beings. The text speaks of ominous signs in the heavens, of divine assemblies, of darkness falling upon the earth, and of warnings delivered through dreams and revelation. For archaeologists and historians, the inscription was extraordinary. Balaam is known from ancient Near Eastern traditions and appears in later religious texts, but here was an independent account, written centuries earlier, presenting him not as a minor figure, but as a respected prophet whose visions were recorded and displayed publicly. Why was this text written here, and who was meant to read it? The building in which the plaster fragments were found may have been a sanctuary, a temple, or a gathering place for religious activity. The presence of painted wall texts suggests a community that valued written prophecy, not only for private use, but as something meant to be seen and remembered. But the story does not end with the writing. The plaster fragments were discovered scattered across the floor because the building itself had been violently destroyed. Archaeological evidence points to a sudden collapse, possibly caused by an earthquake. Thick layers of fallen mud brick and debris sealed the fragments where they lay, preserving them for nearly 3,000 years. And this raises another question. Was the destruction purely natural, or did the event itself become part of the story the community was trying to understand? The Balam text describes cosmic disturbance, divine judgment, and a world thrown into disorder. Some researchers have wondered whether the prophetic message reflected real anxieties, environmental instability, political uncertainty, or natural disasters that shaped the community's sense of vulnerability. Others point to the unusual religious language of the text. The inscription refers to multiple divine beings, heavenly councils, and forces acting together rather than a single dominant deity. This suggests a complex belief system, one that does not fit neatly into later religious traditions. What kind of spiritual world did the people of Tel Deir Alla inhabit? How did they interpret dreams, omens, and natural events? And how common were such prophetic texts in everyday life, beyond the rare example that survived here? The writing itself presents another mystery. Painted inscriptions are far more fragile than carved stone, yet the text was produced with care, using multiple colors and organized lines. This suggests trained scribes and an established tradition of wall writing, one that has left very little trace elsewhere. Was this an isolated practice? Or have similar texts been lost at other sites, erased by time, weather, or rebuilding? Tel Deir Alla also sits in a region known for seismic activity. Geological studies suggest that the Jordan Valley has experienced major earthquakes throughout history. Some layers at the site show repeated cycles of destruction and rebuilding, indicating that the inhabitants lived with the constant possibility of sudden disaster. In such an environment, prophetic traditions may have carried particular weight. When the ground itself could shift without warning, visions and divine messages may have offered a framework for understanding events that otherwise seemed random and uncontrollable. More speculative interpretations have emerged as well. Some researchers have explored whether the celestial imagery in the Balam text, references to darkness, cosmic upheaval, and unusual signs, could reflect observations of rare astronomical or atmospheric events. Others see the text as evidence of a broader prophetic network, connecting communities across the ancient Near East through shared traditions of divination and vision. But much remains uncertain. The fragments are incomplete. Large portions of the original wall text are missing. The building's full function is still debated, and significant areas of the tell remain unexcavated, leaving open the possibility that additional texts, or entirely different kinds of evidence, may still lie beneath the surface. Standing at Tel Deir Alla today, the landscape feels calm and ordinary. Fields stretch toward the horizon. The mound rises gently from the valley floor. Nothing on the surface hints at the voices once recorded here. Warnings painted in red and black. Messages meant to outlast the moment that inspired them. And yet, the survival of those fragments was an accident of destruction. If the building had not collapsed at exactly the right time, the text would likely have vanished completely. Tel Deir Alla reminds us how much of the ancient world depended on fragile materials, on walls and plaster and ink. How many other voices were written, displayed, and lost? How many systems of belief, interpretation, and prophecy existed beyond the small number preserved in stone? The fragments of Balaam's vision offer only a glimpse, a rare survival from a tradition that may once have been far more widespread. Beneath the quiet mound, the possibility remains that other writings, other messages, and other interpretations of the ancient world are still waiting to be uncovered. And if they are found, they may force us to ask a deeper question. Are we uncovering the history of a single site, or the scattered remains of a forgotten way of understanding the universe itself? Was this simply tradition, or evidence of a deliberate effort to maintain a fixed version of sacred knowledge? Did the scribes of Nippur see themselves as guardians of something timeless, unchanged even as kingdoms rose and fell around them? There are also gaps in the record. Entire sections of the city remain unexplored. Early excavations in the late 19th and early 20th centuries removed large quantities of tablets but left many architectural areas only partially studied. Modern archaeological techniques suggest that administrative districts, residential neighborhoods, and additional temple structures may still lie beneath unexcavated zones. Even among the tablets already recovered, thousands remain untranslated or only briefly studied. Each one represents a fragment of daily life, belief, or administration from a world that is still only partially understood. Standing at Nippur today, the landscape appears quiet and empty. The ancient canals are dry. The temple platforms rise only slightly above the surrounding plain. There is no obvious sign of the city's former influence. And yet, for millennia, this was a place where rulers sought legitimacy, where priests performed rituals believed to sustain cosmic order, and where scribes copied the knowledge of an entire civilization. Unlike cities built on military power or trade wealth, Nippur's strength lay in something less visible, authority rooted in belief, memory, and the written word. Its endurance raises a subtle question about the ancient world. How much of history was shaped not by armies or kings, but by centers of knowledge and ritual, places where ideas were preserved long enough to outlast political change? And beneath the remaining mounds of Nippur, more tablets may still wait, sealed in ancient rooms, buried in collapsed archives, holding records of rituals, decisions, or observations never seen by modern eyes. If they are uncovered, they may reveal not only new details about a single city, but clues to how one sacred place helped shape the intellectual and spiritual framework of an entire civilization. Because in Nippur, the greatest mystery may not be what was built, but what was remembered, and what knowledge may still be sleeping in the dust, waiting to be read again. As we leave behind the layered mysteries of ancient Mesopotamia, our journey continues westward, across plains and borders shaped by thousands of years of history. There, near the modern frontier between Syria and Turkey, another silent monument rises from the earth, weathered, broken, and yet strangely powerful. It is a place where stone seems to preserve not just architecture, but intention. A place where scale, symbolism, and absence combine to form a question that has never been fully answered. This is the Ain Dara Temple. Set within a gentle valley surrounded by low hills, the ruins of Ain Dara appear at first glance modest. Fragments of walls, scattered blocks, and the outline of a once grand sanctuary. But as the layout becomes clear, the structure begins to reveal its former presence. This was no ordinary building. Constructed during the early Iron Age, around the 10th to 8th centuries BCE, the temple stood as a major religious center, likely dedicated to a powerful regional deity. Its design is strikingly familiar. A broad staircase leads to a monumental entrance. Beyond it lies a forecourt, then a columned hall, and finally an inner sanctuary, the most sacred space of all. Archaeologists quickly noticed the parallels with a structure described in ancient texts, the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. The proportions, the tripartite layout, even decorative motifs suggest a shared architectural tradition across the Levant. But it is not the plan of the temple that has drawn the most attention. It is what lies at its threshold. Carved into the stone floors near the entrance and within the inner chamber are a series of enormous footprints. Each impression measures nearly 1 meter long, far larger than any human foot. The sequence appears deliberate. 2 prints at the entrance, followed by a single stride leading into the sanctuary, and then another pair deeper inside. The scale is unmistakable. Whoever or whatever these footprints represent would have stood several meters tall. At first, the explanation seems symbolic. Many ancient temples were designed to evoke the presence of a deity entering or inhabiting the sacred space. The footprints, scholars suggest, may represent the divine arrival, an artistic way of showing that the god itself walked into the temple to dwell within. But the precision raises questions. Why depict movement rather than static presence? Why show the god stepping forward, crossing the threshold, advancing into the heart of the sanctuary? And why such extraordinary scale? In ancient Near Eastern belief, gods were not abstract concepts. They were powerful beings, often imagined in human form, but larger, stronger, and capable of interacting with the physical world. Temples were not merely places of worship, they were houses for the gods. Daily rituals treated the divine statue as a living resident, fed, washed, and cared for by priests. From this perspective, the footprints could be seen as architectural storytelling, a symbolic journey, a reminder that the divine was not distant but present. Yet the mystery deepens when considering the broader context of the site. Ain Dara was richly decorated. Basalt reliefs once lined its walls, depicting lions, sphinxes, hybrid creatures, and divine figures. The craftsmanship suggests a highly skilled culture with strong connections to the artistic traditions of Anatolia and Mesopotamia. The temple stood for centuries, surviving political shifts and regional upheavals, and then, sometime in antiquity, it was abandoned. There is no single clear explanation, no definitive record of its destruction. Like many ancient sacred places, it simply fell silent. Some researchers propose that changing political powers shifted religious centers elsewhere. Others suggest natural disasters or gradual decline. But the temple's isolated location and the monumental effort required to build it raise a quiet question. What changed so significantly that such a sacred place was left behind? Beyond mainstream scholarship, the footprints have inspired more speculative interpretations. Some point to ancient myths across the region describing giants or divine beings who walked among humans. Others see the impressions as evidence of a forgotten belief system centered on physical manifestations of the divine. In more fringe discussions, the site has even been linked to theories of lost advanced civilizations or non-human visitors, interpretations that step beyond the evidence, yet persist in the cultural imagination. Archaeology itself offers a more grounded but equally intriguing possibility. The temple may have been designed to create a psychological experience. The oversized footprints, the rising platforms, the narrowing passage into the sanctuary, all could have worked together to make visitors feel small, humbled, and aware of a presence greater than themselves. If Deir Alla reminds us that ancient voices can survive by chance, fragile words preserved through collapse and time, our journey now moves to a place where the voices are not few, but countless. A city where thousands of tablets, prayers, records, and rituals were buried beneath the earth, forming one of the largest archives of the ancient world. In the flat plains of southern Mesopotamia, where the land between the great rivers was once crossed by canals and fertile fields, a wide mound rises from the desert. This is Nippur. Unlike the grand ruins of royal capitals, Nippur does not immediately impress with towering walls or monumental palaces. Its outlines are low and weathered, shaped by wind erosion, and centuries of abandonment. But beneath its surface lies something far more enduring than stone. Nippur was not the political capital of a kingdom. It was something more unusual, and perhaps more influential. For over 2,000 years, from the early Sumerian period through the Babylonian era and beyond, Nippur served as the spiritual and religious heart of Mesopotamia. At the center of the city stood the great temple complex of Ekkur, dedicated to Enlil, the chief deity of the Sumerian pantheon, lord of wind, authority, and cosmic order. Kings from distant cities traveled here to legitimize their rule. Conquerors who destroyed rival capitals often took care to restore Nippur, recognizing that control of the temple meant recognition by the divine order itself. This raises the first mystery. Why did a city without strong political power maintain such influence for so long? Archaeological excavations have uncovered vast numbers of clay tablets, administrative records, hymns, myths, legal texts, and school exercises used to train scribes. Together, they form one of the most important sources for understanding early writing, education, and religious life. But the sheer volume is striking. Tens of thousands of tablets were stored, copied, and preserved here across centuries. Many texts appear repeatedly, carefully rewritten by generations of students and priests. Was Nippur simply a religious center, or was it also something like an intellectual archive, a place where knowledge itself was guarded and transmitted across time? The scribal schools of Nippur trained specialists who would serve in temples and governments across Mesopotamia. The standardization of language, law, and ritual may have depended heavily on what was preserved and taught here. And yet, despite its importance, the city experienced repeated cycles of decline and rebuilding. Flooding, shifting river channels, and political upheaval forced periods of abandonment. Each time, however, the temple was restored, and activity returned. What sustained such long-term continuity? Was it devotion alone, or an organized network of religious and administrative support extending across the region? Another mystery lies in the temple complex itself. The Ekkur was rebuilt many times, each layer constructed atop earlier foundations. Excavations reveal massive mud brick platforms, walls several meters thick, and carefully planned courtyards and ritual spaces. But reconstructing the full layout has proven difficult. Much of the structure eroded long ago, and later rebuilding often obscured earlier designs. Some scholars believe that significant portions of the sacred complex remain unexcavated, buried beneath later layers or lost beneath ancient debris fields. There are also questions about the rituals performed within these walls. Texts from Nippur describe elaborate ceremonies meant to maintain cosmic balance, offerings, chants, purification rites, and seasonal festivals. The temple was not simply a place of worship. It was seen as a point of connection between the human world and the divine. To the people of Mesopotamia, the stability of the cosmos itself depended on these practices. This belief adds another layer of intrigue. When the city declined or the temple fell into disrepair, did people fear not just political collapse, but disorder in the universe itself? Environmental evidence suggests that Nippur's fate was closely tied to water. The shifting courses of the Euphrates and its canals could transform fertile land into dry plain within a generation. Some abandonment phases correspond to periods when irrigation systems failed or river access moved too far from the city. Yet even when conditions worsened, communities returned. More speculative ideas have emerged from the study of Nippur's long occupation. Some researchers have noted the remarkable continuity of religious texts over more than 1,000 years, with certain hymns and rituals preserved almost unchanged. In this sense, the mystery is not about who made the prints, but about the emotional world of those who walked beside them. What did ancient worshippers feel as they approached those massive impressions? Did they believe the god had truly entered before them? Did the silence inside the sanctuary feel inhabited? And perhaps most importantly, what stood at the end of that final stride? The central chamber once held a cult statue, now long gone. Without it, the temple feels incomplete, like a stage after the actors have left. The footprints lead to an absence. In recent years, the site has suffered severe damage during modern conflict. Much of the structure was destroyed in 2018, reducing parts of the temple to rubble. The loss was not only physical but symbolic, a fragment of human history erased before all its questions could be explored. Today, what remains of Ain Dara exists in photographs, excavation records, and memory. The giant footprints still linger in documentation, preserved even as the stones themselves have been shattered. And perhaps that adds another layer to the mystery. For thousands of years, the temple stood as a place where people marked the presence of something beyond themselves, something powerful, unseen, and enduring. Now, the site itself has become a reminder of how fragile our connection to the past truly is. Were the footprints simply symbolic art, a powerful expression of ancient belief? Or were they meant to record an encounter, a memory, or a tradition whose meaning has faded beyond recovery? As the dust settles over the valley where Ain Dara once stood, the path of those giant steps still leads inward, to a sacred space, an empty chamber, and a question that remains quietly waiting. Who or what was meant to walk there? If the temple at Ain Dara leaves us contemplating the presence of the divine, our journey now moves south, into a landscape where the mystery is not who entered a sacred space, but what force brought an entire city to its knees. In the fertile hills of northern Israel, overlooking the Hula Valley, lies a vast mound of earth and stone. From a distance, it appears almost natural, a gentle rise in the terrain shaped by time and wind. But this is no ordinary hill. Beneath its layers rests the remains of one of the greatest cities of the ancient Near East. This is Hazor. Covering more than 200 acres at its height, Hazor was once the largest city in Canaan, a powerful urban center that thrived for centuries during the Bronze Age. Archaeological excavations have revealed massive fortifications, administrative buildings, temples, and an extensive lower city that once housed tens of thousands of people. Trade routes from Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and Egypt converged here, making Hazor a hub of commerce, culture, and political power. Ancient texts confirm its importance. Egyptian records mention Hazor as a major Canaanite stronghold. The Hebrew Bible refers to it as the head of all those kingdoms. For generations, this was a city that commanded influence across the region, and then, suddenly, it burned. Excavations across the site reveal a thick layer of destruction dating to the late 13th century BCE. Charred beams, collapsed walls, smashed statues, and melted pottery all point to a catastrophic fire, one intense enough to reduce large portions of the city to ash. In the remains of a temple, archaeologists discovered shattered basalt statues, some deliberately decapitated. In another area, a royal palace lay buried beneath debris blackened by heat. The scale of the destruction suggests not a gradual decline, but a violent and decisive event. The question is simple: who destroyed Hazor? The most widely known explanation comes from biblical tradition. According to the book of Joshua, Hazor was conquered and burned by the Israelites during their campaign to settle the land. For some researchers, the timing of the archaeological destruction aligns with this narrative. But the story is far from settled. Other scholars argue that the biblical account may reflect later traditions rather than historical events. They point out that evidence for a large-scale Israelite invasion during this period remains debated. Some suggest that internal rebellion, regional warfare between Canaanite city-states, or incursions by external groups, such as the enigmatic Sea Peoples, could have been responsible. Still others propose a more complex scenario: political instability, economic collapse, and shifting alliances combining to weaken the city before a final act of destruction. Yet, certain details remain difficult to explain. The fire that consumed Hazor appears unusually intense. In some areas, mud brick walls were vitrified, partially melted by extreme heat. Storage vessels burst, their contents carbonized. The pattern suggests that the city did not simply burn, it burned fiercely and thoroughly. Was this the result of deliberate, systematic destruction? An army intent not just on conquering the city, but on erasing it? Or could natural forces have played a role? Some researchers have considered the possibility of seismic activity. The region lies along the Dead Sea Transform Fault System, an active tectonic boundary. Earthquakes are known to have damaged cities throughout the ancient Levant. Could an earthquake have weakened structures, sparked fires, or created the conditions for widespread collapse? The evidence, however, remains inconclusive. Beyond the physical destruction, Hazor holds another layer of mystery, one buried deeper in its cultural memory. Among the artifacts discovered are fragments of cuneiform tablets, administrative records written in the script of Mesopotamia. They reveal a sophisticated bureaucracy and connections to distant civilizations. Hazor was not an isolated city. It was part of a vast international network. Then, almost overnight, that network vanished. The destruction of Hazor coincides with the broader collapse of late Bronze Age civilization across the eastern Mediterranean, a period sometimes called the Bronze Age collapse. Major cities fell, trade systems disintegrated, empires weakened or disappeared. For generations, historians have debated what caused this widespread disruption: climate change, famine, migration, war, technological shifts. All have been proposed. Hazor may have been one casualty among many, but its scale, its importance, and the completeness of its destruction make it stand out. There is also the question of what happened afterward. Unlike some cities that were rebuilt quickly, Hazor's lower city was largely abandoned. Life returned to the upper mound, but the great urban center never fully recovered its former size or influence. It is as if the city's heart had stopped. More speculative theories venture beyond conventional history. Some have suggested that Hazor's destruction was not merely political or military, but part of a larger, sudden catastrophe affecting the entire region, an event whose full nature remains unknown. Others see patterns in the intensity of the fires, the sudden abandonment, and the regional collapse that hint at forces not yet fully understood. These interpretations remain outside mainstream archaeology, yet they reflect a deeper truth. The end of the Bronze Age remains one of the great unsolved turning points of human history. Standing atop the mound today, the landscape appears peaceful. The valley stretches wide and green. Birds circle overhead. Stone foundations trace the outlines of streets where thousands once lived. But beneath the soil lies a moment frozen in time, a city caught in its final hours, a palace consumed by flame, statues broken and buried, rooms left as they were when the fire came. Was Hazor destroyed by invading armies, fulfilling ancient narratives of conquest? Did internal conflict or rebellion turn the city against itself? Was it one victim of a larger regional collapse driven by climate, migration, or economic breakdown? Or did some sudden, catastrophic event, natural or human, ignite the inferno that ended centuries of power in a single, devastating chapter? The earth preserves the evidence. The ash remains. The layers are still there, waiting to be read. And yet, after decades of excavation and study, the final cause, the true story of Hazor's fall, remains just beyond reach. Because sometimes, the mystery is not how a civilization rose to greatness, but what force in a single moment made it disappear. If Hazor leaves us with the image of a city consumed by sudden fire, our journey now shifts to a quieter kind of disappearance, one without flames, without invading armies, and without the dramatic scars of destruction. Here, the mystery is not how a great city was destroyed, but how an entire civilization simply faded away. In the northeastern plains of Syria, near the Khabur River basin, a broad, silent mound rises from the dry landscape. Winds sweep across fields that once supported dense populations. From a distance, Tel Leilan appears unremarkable, just another ancient tell shaped by thousands of years of human occupation. But beneath its surface lies evidence of one of the most puzzling collapses in ancient history. At its height, around 2200 BCE, Tel Leilan was a thriving urban center within the Akkadian Empire, the first known empire in the world. Archaeological excavations reveal a carefully planned city. Massive defensive walls, administrative complexes, storage facilities, and residential districts arranged with deliberate order. This was not a small settlement growing organically over time. It was a strategic imperial city built to manage agriculture, trade, and regional control. Tablets discovered at the site record bureaucratic systems, grain distributions, and economic transactions. The surrounding plains were intensively farmed, producing the grain that helped sustain imperial power across northern Mesopotamia. For generations, Tel Leilan flourished. Then, abruptly, it was abandoned. Archaeologists studying the site found a thick, unusual layer covering parts of the city, a deposit of fine dust and wind-blown sediment. Beneath this layer, the remains of buildings and streets were preserved. Above it, there was almost nothing. No signs of rebuilding, no gradual decline, no evidence of destruction by war. The city did not burn. It was simply left behind. Radiocarbon dating and stratigraphic analysis suggest that this abandonment occurred around 2200 BCE, the same period when the Akkadian Empire collapsed across Mesopotamia. Cities were deserted, trade networks failed, political authority fragmented. For decades, historians debated what could have caused such widespread disruption. Then came a theory that would reshape the conversation. Researchers began to propose that the collapse of Tel Leilan and much of the Akkadian world was linked to a sudden and severe climate event. Geological and environmental studies across the Middle East revealed evidence of what is now called the 4.2 kiloyear event, a period of intense drought that may have lasted for decades, possibly longer. Lake sediments, cave formations, and soil records all point to a dramatic shift toward arid conditions around the same time. Tel Leilan was abandoned. At the site itself, archaeologists found evidence that agricultural systems had failed. Fields that once supported large populations could no longer produce enough food. Without grain, the administrative machinery of empire began to break down. In this interpretation, the city was not destroyed by enemies. It was defeated by the sky. And yet, the story may not be so simple. The dust layer at Tel Leilan is unusually thick, suggesting not just gradual drying, but intense wind activity, perhaps massive dust storms sweeping across the plains. Some researchers describe the landscape at the time as transforming rapidly, turning once productive farmland into something closer to steppe or semi-desert. If conditions changed quickly enough, populations may have been forced to leave in a matter of years, not generations. But this raises deeper questions. How sudden was the shift? Could a complex urban system collapse so quickly from environmental stress alone? Or were other factors already weakening the region? Political instability, overexpansion, soil exhaustion, or internal conflict? Some scholars argue that the Akkadian Empire had become too dependent on fragile agricultural systems at the edge of viable rainfall zones. When the climate shifted, even slightly, the entire structure may have been pushed beyond its limits. Others suggest that climate acted as a trigger rather than the sole cause, accelerating tensions that were already building. And then there are the more speculative interpretations. Ancient Mesopotamian texts speak of the Akkadian collapse in dramatic terms, describing famine, chaos, and the anger of the gods. One literary composition, The Curse of Akkad, tells of drought so severe that crops failed, water disappeared, and people wandered in search of food. Was this poetic metaphor, or a cultural memory of real environmental catastrophe? Some researchers have even explored whether abrupt atmospheric changes, volcanic activity, or broader global climate disruptions could have contributed to the event. What makes Tell Leilan especially compelling is the clarity of its archaeological silence. In many ancient cities, decline leaves traces, layers of rebuilding, reduced populations, changing architecture. But here, the occupation simply stops. The urban landscape freezes in place, covered by dust and left untouched for centuries. Who were the last people to walk its streets? Did they believe the drought would pass? Did administrators attempt to ration grain to hold the system together as supplies dwindled? Or did the decision come suddenly, an acknowledgement that the land itself could no longer support life? Perhaps caravans left slowly over months and years, families migrating south toward more reliable water sources. Perhaps others stayed too long, hoping for rains that never came. After the abandonment, the region remained sparsely populated for generations. When people eventually returned, they did not rebuild the same kind of large urban centers. Something fundamental had changed. And this raises one of the most unsettling aspects of the Tell Leilan story. If climate alone could bring down one of the world's first empires, how resilient were ancient civilizations really? More broadly, Tell Leilan has become a key piece of evidence in a growing field of research exploring how environmental change influences societal collapse. The site is often cited as one of the earliest clear examples of climate-driven urban abandonment. But even here, uncertainty remains. Climate records show regional variation. Not every city was abandoned. Some areas adapted, others declined more gradually. Human responses to environmental stress are complex, shaped by politics, technology, trade, and social organization. Tell Leilan may represent a tipping point, a place where multiple pressures converged and where adaptation was no longer possible. Or it may reflect something even more fragile, a system built so efficiently for one set of conditions that it could not survive even modest change. Today, the mound stands quiet under the Syrian sky. Wind still moves across the plains. Dust still settles into the ruins. The city's walls, administrative halls, and storage buildings remain buried, preserved by the very forces that may have ended its life. No battle scars, no burned palaces, only silence. Was Tell Leilan abandoned slowly as drought tightened its grip year after year? Did a sudden environmental shift force a rapid evacuation of an entire urban population? Was climate the primary cause, or just one part of a larger collapse already unfolding? And perhaps most haunting of all, how many other ancient cities vanished not in fire or conquest, but simply because the world around them changed faster than they could adapt? At Tell Leilan, the evidence lies in the dust, and the question remains, what else might still be hidden beneath it, waiting to tell the full story of a civilization that did not fall, but faded? If Tell Leilan leaves us with the image of a civilization undone by forces beyond its control, our journey now turns to a very different story, one not of collapse, but of mastery. Here, instead of dust and abandonment, we encounter flowing water, carved stone, and a system so complex that even today its full design is still being studied. In southwestern Iran, where the hot plains meet the rugged foothills of the Zagros Mountains, the Karun River cuts its way through the landscape. Near the ancient city of Shushtar, the river does something unusual. It divides, slows, redirects, and descends through a network of canals, tunnels, dams, and cascades that appear almost natural at first glance. But nothing here is accidental. This is the Shushtar Historical Hydraulic System, an immense interconnected water management network built more than 1,700 years ago during the Sasanian period, though parts of it may be even older. From above, the system resembles a vast engineered landscape designed not just to control water, but to harness its power with remarkable precision. Stone channels guide the river's flow. Weirs raise water levels. Underground tunnels carry water beneath the city. At one dramatic point, the river plunges over a series of artificial cliffs into a basin filled with the remains of ancient mills, once powered by the force of cascading water. The sound must have been constant. The turning of wheels, the rush of controlled currents, the quiet hum of a city sustained by engineered flow. Historians often describe Shushtar as one of the greatest hydraulic achievements of the ancient world. The system irrigated vast agricultural lands, supported urban life, and powered dozens of water mills used for grinding grain. But as researchers have examined the site more closely, a deeper question has emerged. How did ancient engineers design something this complex, without modern surveying tools, advanced mathematics, or industrial machinery? The core of the system relies on careful manipulation of elevation. Water must move at precise speeds, not too fast, not too slow. Channels must be angled correctly. Pressure must be distributed across multiple routes. Flooding must be prevented during seasonal surges, while maintaining flow during dry periods. Modern engineers studying the site have noted that the system functions as an integrated whole. Each dam, canal, and tunnel affects the others. Remove one element and the balance could fail. Yet the builders achieved this coordination using stone, earth, and human labor. Some historical accounts suggest that Roman engineers may have contributed to the system's construction. According to later Persian traditions, Roman soldiers captured during the wars of the Sasanian king Shapur I were put to work on major infrastructure projects, possibly including Shushtar. If true, the system may represent a fusion of Persian planning and Roman technical expertise. But even this explanation raises further questions. The hydraulic landscape of Shushtar appears to have evolved over time, with earlier foundations modified and expanded by later generations. Some elements may date back to the Achaemenid era, centuries before the Sasanians. Others show evidence of continuous maintenance and redesign. This was not a single project. It was a living machine, adapted across centuries. And yet, despite its long use, many aspects of its original design remain uncertain. Some tunnels run beneath the city for distances that are difficult to map even today. Certain channels appear oversized for their known functions. In other places, water is diverted along routes whose original purpose is no longer clear. Archaeologists and hydrologists continue to debate whether the system was optimized primarily for irrigation, industrial power, flood control, or some combination of all three. Then there is the scale. The number of mills once operating at Shushtar may have exceeded 40. Coordinating water flow to power them simultaneously would have required careful calculation of volume and timing. Seasonal changes in the Karun's flow would have demanded ongoing adjustments. How were these measurements made? Were they based on trial and error over generations? Or did ancient engineers possess more advanced empirical knowledge of fluid behavior than we fully recognize? Some researchers have suggested that the builders relied on long-term observation of river cycles, developing practical hydrological knowledge passed down through specialist guilds or state engineers. Others point to the remarkable precision of certain channels and slopes, arguing that the system reflects a level of planning closer to scientific engineering than simple experimentation. And then there are the more speculative perspectives. A few fringe theories suggest that the scale and integration of Shushtar hint at lost or underappreciated technical traditions, systems of measurement, calculation, or design that were never formally recorded or that were lost as political structures changed. Some even propose that ancient civilizations may have achieved periods of technical sophistication that later declined, leaving only their physical works behind. These ideas remain outside mainstream scholarship, yet they reflect a genuine puzzle. The more closely Shushtar is studied, the more it appears less like a collection of ancient structures, and more like a coordinated technological landscape. There is also the question of labor. Constructing dams across a major river, excavating long tunnels through rock, and shaping extensive canal networks would have required enormous manpower and administrative organization. Workers would have needed food, tools, supervision, and long-term planning. What kind of state authority sustained such efforts? How many years or decades did construction take? And how was the system maintained once completed? Water systems, perhaps more than any other infrastructure, demand constant care. Sediment builds up, channels erode, structures weaken. For centuries, Shushtar continued to function, suggesting not just engineering skill, but a stable tradition of maintenance and technical knowledge. But like many ancient systems, its full operation eventually declined. Political changes, shifting trade routes, economic disruptions, and the gradual breakdown of centralized authority all contributed to its partial abandonment. Today, parts of the system still carry water. Others stand silent, stone channels dry, mill chambers empty, tunnels half collapsed but still traceable beneath the surface. Visitors who walk through the site often describe a strange impression, that the system feels less like ruins and more like a machine waiting to be restarted. Water still moves where it can. Gravity still does its work. The design still holds. Modern engineers studying Shushtar often express a quiet respect for its builders. In an era before concrete, steel, or powered excavation, they created a water management system that functioned for more than a millennium. And yet, despite ongoing research, a complete reconstruction of its original operational model remains elusive. Which channels were opened or closed at different times? How were seasonal adjustments made? What control mechanisms, gates, barriers, or timing systems have been lost to erosion and time? And perhaps most intriguing of all, if such a system could be built, expanded, and maintained for centuries using ancient tools and knowledge, how much of that practical expertise has been forgotten? Was Shushtar the product of gradual improvement across generations? Or did it begin with a level of planning and vision that we still struggle to fully understand? Standing above the cascading terraces, listening to water move through stone pathways carved nearly 2,000 years ago, the question becomes difficult to ignore. Was this simply an extraordinary example of ancient engineering? Or a reminder that some forms of knowledge, once mastered, can flow through history like a river, until, quietly and without warning, they disappear? And if parts of that knowledge are gone, what else might still be hidden within the channels, tunnels, and silent foundations of Shushtar, waiting for the moment when the system, at last, reveals how it truly worked? If the flowing waters of Shushtar remind us that ancient civilizations could master the forces of nature, our journey now moves to a place where the mystery is not about engineering alone, but about origins, about the very beginning of organized power in human history. In the flat alluvial plains of central Iraq, where the land stretches endlessly beneath a wide and unforgiving sky, a series of low mounds rises from the earth. To an untrained eye, they might appear as nothing more than natural hills shaped by wind and time. But these mounds are not natural. They are the remains of Kish, one of the oldest cities in the world, and a place where myth, history, and unanswered questions meet at the threshold of civilization itself. Thousands of years ago, this quiet landscape was alive with movement. Mud brick walls enclosed temples and palaces. Canals carried water from the rivers. Markets, workshops, and homes filled the city with sound. Kish stood near the heart of early Mesopotamia, part of the network of urban centers that gave rise to writing, government, and organized society. But what makes Kish unique is not just its age. It is the role it plays in the earliest stories ever written. According to the Sumerian king list, an ancient text that records the succession of rulers across early Mesopotamia, there is a moment when the world changes forever. After a great flood, the text declares, "Kingship descended from heaven." And the first city to receive this divine authority was Kish. Whether taken literally or symbolically, the message is clear. Kish was remembered as the first center of earthly power after a world-altering catastrophe. Archaeology confirms that the city was indeed one of the earliest major urban centers, flourishing as early as the early dynastic period, around 2900 BCE. Excavations have uncovered administrative buildings, temples, fortifications, and extensive residential areas. Clay tablets found at the site record economic transactions, labor management, and early bureaucratic systems. Kish was not only a religious center, it was an administrative machine, part of the emerging structure of organized governance. Yet from the very beginning, the evidence presents a puzzle. The Sumerian king list assigns extraordinarily long reigns to the earliest rulers of Kish, some lasting hundreds or even thousands of years. Mainstream historians interpret these numbers as symbolic or mythological, reflecting prestige rather than literal time. But the blending of myth and administration raises a deeper question. At what point does legend become history? And how much of Kish's earliest past remains hidden behind symbolic language we no longer fully understand? Among the most intriguing discoveries at Kish is a structure known as the Palace A complex, one of the earliest known large administrative buildings. Its scale suggests centralized authority, organized labor, and long-term planning at a time when urban society was still in its infancy. Even more curious are the city's fortifications. Massive defensive walls surrounded parts of Kish, indicating concerns about conflict or instability. But against whom? Early Mesopotamia was a landscape of competing city-states, alliances, and shifting power. And Kish, according to ancient texts, held a special status. The title, King of Kish, appears repeatedly in early inscriptions, even used by rulers of other cities who never physically controlled Kish itself. In this context, the title may have meant something more than political dominance. It may have symbolized universal authority. Why did Kish carry such prestige? Was it simply one of the earliest successful cities, or did it occupy a deeper cultural or religious role in the region's memory? Then there is the question of the flood. Across Mesopotamian literature, stories of a great deluge appear again and again. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes a catastrophic flood sent by the gods. Other texts reference similar events. Some researchers have proposed that these stories preserve cultural memories of real large-scale flooding in the river plains. At Kish, archaeologists discovered a layer of river sediment separating early occupation levels from later construction. For a time, this was interpreted as possible evidence of a major flood event. However, later research showed that similar flood layers appear at different times in different cities, suggesting localized flooding rather than a single region-wide catastrophe. Still, the persistence of the flood narrative, and Kish's role as the first city after it, continues to intrigue historians and researchers. Was there a particularly destructive flood at Kish that shaped regional memory? Or did the city's symbolic status grow over time, transforming local events into mythic history? Another mystery lies in the city's long and complex occupation. Kish was not built once and abandoned. It was destroyed, rebuilt, expanded, and reorganized multiple times across millennia. Each layer represents a different era, a different political order, a different population adapting to changing conditions. And yet, despite this continuity, the city never fully regained the central prestige it held in the earliest periods. Power shifted to other cities, Uruk, Babylon, while Kish remained inhabited but diminished. Why did the first great center of kingship lose its position? Was it economic decline? Environmental change? Political displacement? Or did its symbolic importance eventually outweigh its practical role? Excavations at Kish have also produced some unexpected finds, including early wheeled vehicles, advanced metalwork, and evidence of long-distance trade. Materials such as lapis lazuli and exotic stones suggest connections reaching far beyond the Mesopotamian plain. This raises another question. How advanced were the economic and logistical networks of the earliest cities? Earlier than we once believed? Some researchers argue that urban complexity in places like Kish appeared with surprising speed, suggesting that earlier, less visible stages of organization may have existed before large cities emerged. Others point to the possibility that early Mesopotamian society developed through rapid innovation driven by environmental pressure and competition. Then there are the more speculative interpretations. Because Kish appears at the boundary between mythic time and documented history, some alternative theories suggest that the earliest urban civilization may have inherited knowledge or social structures from earlier, poorly understood cultures. Mainstream archaeology finds no evidence for lost advanced civilizations. But the question remains, how did complex urban systems, writing, administration, monumental construction, emerge so quickly in the archaeological record? At Kish, the transition from village life to organized state authority appears compressed within a relatively short span of time. Standing among the low mounds today, it is difficult to imagine the weight of the city's legacy. There are no towering monuments like those of later empires. Much of Kish was built from mud brick, slowly eroded by wind, rain, and time. What remains is subtle. Layers beneath layers, fragments of walls, broken tablets, traces of streets long vanished. Yet in the ancient imagination, this was where kingship began, where authority became institutional, where power was no longer temporary but structured, recorded, and remembered. Was Kish truly the first great seat of organized rule? Did a real catastrophe shape its rise in cultural memory? How much of its early history lies hidden beneath symbolic texts that we still struggle to interpret? And perhaps most intriguing of all, if the earliest records of civilization place Kish at the moment when order emerged from chaos, when kingship descended from heaven, what memories, events, or transformations inspired that powerful image? Beneath the quiet soil of the Mesopotamian plain, the origins of organized power remain buried. And somewhere within the layers of Kish, the boundary between myth and history may still be waiting to be uncovered. If Kish invites us to stand at the threshold where myth begins to merge with the earliest structures of power, our journey now moves north, into the highlands of central Anatolia, where another ancient site challenges what we think we know about the origins of wealth, ritual, and early civilization. In the rolling plains of modern-day Turkey, surrounded by low hills and open sky, a broad mound rises quietly from the landscape. This is Alacahoyuk, a place that, at first glance, seems modest. There are no towering pyramids, no massive stone temples dominating the horizon. And yet, beneath this unassuming hill lies one of the most extraordinary collections of ancient treasures ever discovered. Objects so intricate, so symbolically rich, that they raise a question archaeologists are still trying to answer. Who were the people of Alacahoyuk, and how did they create such complexity so early? Excavations at the site began in the early 20th century, revealing layers of occupation stretching back more than 5,000 years. The settlement was inhabited during the early Bronze Age, long before the rise of the Hittite Empire, although the Hittites would later build monumental gates and structures here. But it was the deeper layers, the oldest ones, that drew the greatest attention. Archaeologists uncovered a series of royal tombs dating to around 2500 to 2200 BCE. These were not simple burials. The graves contained extraordinary objects, finely crafted gold jewelry, bronze weapons, ceremonial vessels, and perhaps most mysterious of all, intricate metal standards, delicate sculptures of animals, sun discs, and abstract geometric forms. The craftsmanship is astonishing. Thin sheets of gold hammered into complex shapes, bronze cast with remarkable precision, decorative motifs that suggest symbolic systems, religious beliefs, and artistic traditions already fully developed. Yet, at this time, the surrounding region was not thought to contain large urban states comparable to Mesopotamia or Egypt. So who produced these objects? The tombs themselves add to the mystery. Many contained the remains of individuals buried with great care, surrounded by wealth and ritual offerings. In several cases, animal sacrifices, particularly cattle, were placed near the deceased, suggesting ceremonial practices of significant social importance. Some scholars believe these were the graves of local rulers or elite families, part of a regional power structure that has left little written record. But unlike Mesopotamia, there are no contemporary texts here to explain the society, its leaders, or its beliefs. Everything must be interpreted from material remains, and the material speaks of a culture more organized and more connected than once imagined. Metals found at Alacahoyuk include not only locally available resources, but materials that may have traveled long distances through early trade networks. The presence of tin-bronze alloys suggests knowledge of complex metallurgy and access to trade routes that linked Anatolia to wider exchange systems. This raises an important question. How extensive were early trade networks in the 3rd millennium BCE? Were communities like Alacahoyuk isolated regional cultures, or part of a much larger economic world that has left only fragmentary traces? Then there are the so-called sun discs, perhaps the most iconic artifacts from the site. These circular standards, often mounted on poles and decorated with radiating patterns and animal figures, have been interpreted as religious symbols, possibly connected to solar worship, fertility rituals, or cosmological beliefs. But their exact meaning remains uncertain. Were they carried in ceremonial processions, placed in temples, used as royal insignia, or did they represent something more abstract, symbols of authority, protection, or the structure of the universe as understood by the people who made them? Without written records, interpretation remains cautious. Yet the symbolism appears deliberate and consistent, suggesting a shared belief system across generations. Another mystery lies in the apparent suddenness of cultural development. The richness of the royal tombs suggests a society with social hierarchy, specialized craftsmen, organized labor, and ritual traditions already well established. But where did this system come from? Was it the result of gradual local development over centuries that left little archaeological trace? Or did cultural ideas, metallurgy, ritual practices, artistic styles, arrive through contact with other regions? Some researchers point to Anatolia's position as a crossroads between Mesopotamia, the Caucasus, and the Aegean world. Cultural influences may have moved through trade, migration, or small-scale interactions long before large empires appeared. Others suggest that Anatolia itself may have been a center of independent innovation, developing complex societies earlier than traditionally recognized. And then there are the more speculative interpretations. Because the royal tombs appear so sophisticated for their time, some fringe theories suggest the existence of lost regional kingdoms or advanced cultural traditions that flourished briefly and then disappeared, leaving only isolated archaeological evidence. Mainstream archaeology favors gradual development and regional interaction. But even within conventional explanations, the gaps remain significant. Why do such rich burials appear here, while nearby settlements show much simpler material culture? Was Alacahoyuk a ceremonial center rather than a large population hub? Did its importance lie more in ritual and symbolism than in political or economic power? Later, during the Hittite period, the site gained monumental architecture, including the famous Sphinx Gate, massive stone sculptures guarding the entrance to a fortified city. This suggests that the location retained cultural or strategic significance for centuries. But by then, the creators of the royal tombs were long gone. Their language, their names, their stories, all lost. Only their metalwork remains. Perhaps the most striking aspect of Alacahoyuk is the precision of its craftsmanship. Gold objects were shaped without modern tools. Bronze standards were cast with delicate structural balance. Decorative symmetry suggests careful planning and advanced artistic control. How were these objects produced? What training did artisans receive? Were there workshops, master craftsmen, apprentices passing down techniques across generations? Or were some of these skills rare, closely guarded, and eventually lost? Standing at the site today, the mound appears quiet and unassuming. The treasures have been removed to museums. The structures have eroded. Wind moves across the Anatolian plain much as it did thousands of years ago. But beneath the surface lies evidence of a society that understood symbolism, metallurgy, ritual, and power at a level that still surprises researchers. Who were the rulers buried with sun discs and animal standards? What ceremonies once took place around these objects? Why did such extraordinary wealth and craftsmanship appear here, and then vanish from the historical record? And perhaps most intriguingly, if Alacahoyuk represents only one surviving fragment of a wider cultural world, how many other centers of early power and ritual once existed across Anatolia, now lost, eroded, or still waiting beneath the soil? The golden symbols of Alacahoyuk reflect a society we can see, but not fully understand. And somewhere beneath the quiet mound, the deeper story of its people may still be hidden, waiting for the moment when the past reveals how complex the early world truly was. If Alacahoyuk leaves us with the image of a culture known only through its treasures, its people silent, its symbols enduring, our journey now turns toward a different kind of mystery. Not a buried city beneath a mound, but a place long believed to have vanished entirely. For centuries, travelers and storytellers spoke of a lost city somewhere in the deserts of southern Arabia. A city of wealth and trade, built on the riches of incense and caravans. A place so prosperous, some accounts claimed, that it rivaled the great centers of the ancient world. Its name was Ubar. In the southern reaches of the Arabian Peninsula, where the sands of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, stretch across one of the most inhospitable landscapes on Earth, the desert appears endless. Wind reshapes the dunes constantly. Entire landscapes shift over time. If a city once stood here, the desert would not simply bury it, it would erase it. For much of modern history, Ubar existed only in legend. Classical writers referred to a place called Iobarita. Medieval Arab traditions spoke of a lost city destroyed for its arrogance. Some linked it to the Quranic account of a powerful people known as Ad, whose great city was brought down suddenly, swallowed by the sands. Western explorers later gave it another name, the Atlantis of the Sands. But was Ubar ever a real city? Or was it only a story, an echo of memory transformed by time and tradition? In the late 20th century, the search for Ubar took an unexpected turn. Using satellite imagery, researchers began to identify ancient caravan routes crossing the southern Arabian deserts. These routes converged at certain points, places where wells or oases must once have existed. One such convergence led to a site in modern Oman known as Shushtar. Excavations there revealed the remains of a fortified settlement, stone walls, towers, and evidence of long-distance trade dating back more than 2,000 years. Most significantly, beneath the central structure lay a massive limestone cavern that had collapsed, causing part of the settlement to sink dramatically into the ground. For some researchers, this seemed to match the ancient descriptions. A trading center, located at a critical water source, destroyed suddenly. Could this be Ubar? Mainstream archaeology now interprets the site not as a vast lost metropolis, but as an important caravan station, a hub along the frankincense trade routes that once connected southern Arabia to the Mediterranean, Mesopotamia, and beyond. For centuries, frankincense was one of the most valuable commodities in the world, used in religious rituals, medicine, and royal ceremonies. Control of its trade brought wealth and influence to the region. In this context, Shushtar, and possibly Ubar, may have been less a city of towering monuments and more a strategic desert fortress, sustaining caravans moving through one of the harshest environments on Earth. But even this explanation leaves unanswered questions. How did such settlements survive in an environment where water is scarce and conditions extreme? Archaeological evidence suggests that ancient inhabitants relied on underground water systems, careful well management, and detailed knowledge of seasonal movement. Caravans would have depended on precise navigation between reliable water sources, forming a network of routes invisible to anyone without specialized knowledge. Some researchers believe that this desert knowledge was so sophisticated that entire landscapes were effectively mapped and managed without written records. Others suggest that the region may once have been less arid than it is today. Paleoclimate studies indicate that parts of Arabia experienced wetter periods in the past, supporting vegetation, wildlife, and more stable human settlement. If environmental conditions changed gradually, trade centers like Ubar may have declined as water sources failed and desert conditions intensified. Then there is the dramatic collapse at the Shushtar site itself. The central sinkhole appears to have formed when an underground limestone cavern gave way, causing surface structures to fall inward. This geological process is well understood, but its timing and impact remain subjects of study. Did the collapse occur suddenly, destroying the settlement in a single event? Or did structural instability develop gradually, weakening the site over time? Ancient accounts often describe Ubar as being swallowed by the desert. Was this a poetic description of environmental decline, or a cultural memory of a real geological disaster? And beyond the archaeological evidence lies the deeper question of scale. The legends describe a great city of pillars and immense wealth. The excavated remains at Shushtar, while significant, are far smaller than the mythic descriptions. Some scholars argue that Ubar may not have been a single city at all, but a region or network of trading settlements collectively remembered as one place. There suggests that the legend grew over centuries as stories of trade, wealth, and sudden disappearance merged into a single narrative. And then there are the more speculative theories. Because the empty quarter remains one of the least explored regions on Earth, some researchers and explorers have wondered whether additional settlements, perhaps larger ones, may still lie buried beneath the dunes, undetected by modern surveys. Satellite technology has revealed ancient river channels and caravan paths previously unknown. In some areas, dunes may conceal archaeological remains tens of meters below the surface. The possibility remains that what has been found so far represents only a fragment of a much larger ancient landscape. There is also the cultural dimension. Stories of Ubar's destruction often carry a moral theme: prosperity, followed by sudden ruin. In religious and traditional narratives, the city's fall is sometimes linked to arrogance, excess, or moral decline. Whether historical or symbolic, such stories reflect a long-standing human pattern: the transformation of environmental or economic collapse into moral memory. A prosperous trade center disappears. Water sources fail, caravan routes shift, and over generations the story becomes something larger: a warning, a legend, a lost civilization swallowed by the sands. Today, the site at Hazor stands quiet under the desert sun. The remains of its towers overlook dunes that stretch beyond the horizon. Wind moves constantly across the landscape, reshaping the surface, hiding and revealing traces of the past. The caravan routes are long gone. The incense trade has faded. The desert remains. Was Ubar a single city, remembered and magnified by tradition? Was it a network of settlements, its memory condensed into legend? Did geological collapse, climate change, or shifting trade routes bring about its disappearance? Or are there still undiscovered sites buried deep within the empty quarter? Places where the full story of Arabia's lost trade centers has yet to emerge? In a landscape where the wind never stops moving, the past is never entirely secure. And somewhere beneath the shifting dunes of the empty quarter, the true scale of Ubar, whether legend, memory, or something still hidden, may still be waiting to be found. If the story of Ubar reminds us that entire cities can vanish beneath shifting sands, our journey now turns to a place where a different choice was made. Instead of building upward against the forces of nature and time, its inhabitants moved in the opposite direction, downward, into the earth itself. In the heart of Cappadocia, in central Turkey, the landscape is shaped by ancient volcanoes and centuries of erosion. Soft volcanic rock forms strange cones, valleys, and ridges. At the surface, the region feels open and exposed beneath a wide sky. But beneath one quiet town lies something few would expect. Deep below the modern streets of Derinkuyu, a vast underground city descends into darkness, level after level carved into the rock, extending more than 60 meters below ground. Narrow corridors connect chambers, storage rooms, kitchens, stables, chapels, wells, and ventilation shafts. At its largest known extent, the complex could have sheltered tens of thousands of people. And what makes Derinkuyu remarkable is not only its scale, it is the question it raises. Why would an entire community choose to live underground? The soft volcanic tuff of Cappadocia makes excavation possible, even with simple tools. Archaeological evidence suggests that underground spaces in the region began as early as the Hittite period, around the 2nd millennium BCE, though the deepest and most extensive expansions likely occurred during the Byzantine era. Historical explanations point to one primary purpose: protection. The region lay along routes frequently crossed by invading armies, raiders, and shifting political powers. In times of danger, entire populations could retreat underground, sealing entrances with massive circular stone doors that could only be moved from the inside. These stone doors still remain, some weighing hundreds of kilograms, designed to roll into place and block narrow passageways. Once sealed, the underground city could sustain life for extended periods. Ventilation shafts provided fresh air. Deep wells supplied water independent of surface sources. Storage rooms held grain, oil, and dried food. But as researchers have studied Derinkuyu more closely, the scale of planning has drawn increasing attention. This was not a simple shelter. It was a fully functioning subterranean settlement. Multiple levels were organized by purpose. Livestock were kept near upper levels. Living quarters and communal areas lay deeper. Religious spaces were carved into quiet chambers far from entrances. Some ventilation shafts descend more than 50 meters, engineered to maintain airflow throughout the complex. Even today, air moves through the passages. The system still works. And this leads to one of the central questions surrounding Derinkuyu. How was such a complex environment planned without modern engineering knowledge? Excavation deep underground requires careful consideration of structural stability, airflow, drainage, and access routes. The tunnels must be narrow enough for defense, but wide enough for movement. The rock must be carved without weakening supporting layers. Mainstream archaeology suggests gradual development over centuries. Each generation expanded existing spaces, responding to immediate needs rather than following a single master plan. Yet the result appears remarkably coordinated. Some researchers believe that early builders possessed detailed practical knowledge of the rock's structural behavior, passed down through experience. Others suggest that certain deeper levels may have been designed with long-term occupation in mind from the beginning. Then there is the question of scale beyond a single site. Derinkuyu is not alone. Across Cappadocia, dozens of underground cities have been discovered, some connected by long tunnels stretching for kilometers. Nearby Kaimakli is another major complex, and smaller networks appear scattered throughout the region. This suggests not isolated emergency shelters, but a regional adaptation, a landscape where entire communities maintained hidden infrastructure beneath their daily lives. What kind of society invests generations of labor into spaces that may only be used during times of crisis? How often were these underground cities actually occupied? Were there periods when people lived below ground for months, or even years? Historical records mention waves of conflict in the region, including Arab-Byzantine wars and later invasions. In such times, underground refuge may have been a matter of survival, but some features hint at longer-term use. Wine presses, schools, religious chambers large enough for gatherings. These spaces suggest not just hiding, but living. And then there are the deeper mysteries. The ventilation system alone is a remarkable achievement. Some shafts also functioned as communication points or concealed exits. Wells were designed so that water could not be easily poisoned from the surface. The complexity suggests careful planning for siege conditions. But who coordinated such efforts? Was construction directed by local authorities, religious communities, or centralized administration? How many workers were involved? And over how many generations did the city reach its current depth? The deeper levels of Derinkuyu remain only partially explored. Some passages are sealed for safety. Others lead into areas that have yet to be fully mapped. This has led to more speculative interpretations. Because the underground network is so extensive, some alternative theories propose that parts of the system may be far older than currently believed, perhaps originating in prehistoric periods and later reused by historical populations. Mainstream research finds strongest evidence for major expansion during Byzantine times, but the possibility of earlier phases continues to be investigated. There are also broader questions about human adaptation. What psychological impact did prolonged underground living have? How did communities manage light, time, and social organization in an environment without natural day and night cycles? What routines developed to maintain health, sanitation, and morale? Standing in the narrow corridors today, the silence is striking. Light fades quickly. Sound carries differently. The air feels cool and still. And yet, for centuries, people prepared to live here. Not temporarily, but completely. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Derinkuyu is its hidden nature. From the surface, nothing suggests the vast world below. Ordinary homes once concealed entrances. Daily life continued above ground, while an entire parallel city waited beneath. A place of refuge. A place of contingency. A city designed not for prosperity, but for survival. Today, only a fraction of the complex is open to visitors. Much remains sealed, unstable, or unexplored. And beyond Derinkuyu, Cappadocia's underground landscape continues to reveal new chambers, tunnels, and hidden spaces. How extensive is the network truly? How many undiscovered levels remain beneath the region? Was Derinkuyu the largest of its kind, or simply the most visible? And perhaps most intriguing of all, what kind of world shapes a civilization that prepares entire cities beneath the earth, investing generations of effort into spaces they hope never to use? Deep beneath the quiet town, the tunnels of Derinkuyu still descend into shadow, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the mapped corridors, the full scale of the underground world may still be waiting, hidden, silent, and not yet fully understood. If the underground world of Derinkuyu reveals how far ancient societies were willing to go to survive unseen, our journey now turns to something much smaller, an object that fits in the palm of a hand. Yet despite its size, it raises a question that reaches far beyond a single artifact. Did the ancient world see more than we think? In the ruins of Nimrud, an ancient Assyrian city in northern Iraq, archaeologists uncovered countless objects reflecting the power and sophistication of one of history's great empires. Massive stone reliefs, palace walls, carved ivories, administrative tablets, evidence of a civilization that dominated the Near East nearly 3,000 years ago. But among these monumental discoveries, one small object stood apart. It is known today as the Nimrud lens. Carved from a piece of rock crystal and dating to approximately the 8th century BCE, the object is oval in shape, roughly 3.8 centimeters across, and carefully polished on both sides. When held at certain angles, it can magnify objects beneath it. At first glance, it appears simple, almost unremarkable. Yet since its discovery in the mid-19th century, this small crystal has sparked an enduring debate. Was it simply a decorative object, or did the Assyrians possess an early form of optical technology? The lens was discovered in the palace of Nimrud, a major Assyrian capital under King Ashurnasirpal II and his successors. The palace complex housed workshops where artisans produced intricate carvings, jewelry, and finely detailed ivory inlays. The level of detail in some of these artworks is extraordinary, patterns so fine that modern observers sometimes wonder how they were executed without magnification. This is where the mystery begins. When examined, the Nimrud lens shows evidence of deliberate shaping and polishing. It is not perfectly symmetrical by modern optical standards, and the magnification it produces is modest. There are surface imperfections, slight distortions, and uneven curvature. Mainstream archaeologists often interpret the object as a decorative inlay, an ornamental element set into furniture or jewelry. Its irregular optical quality, they argue, suggests it was not designed specifically as a scientific instrument. But others see something more. Some researchers and historians have suggested that the lens may have been used as a magnifying tool, perhaps by craftsmen working on fine details, or by scribes and artisans engaged in delicate work. Even a small amount of magnification could have made a significant difference when carving ivory, engraving metal, or working with tiny decorative elements. There is also the possibility that the crystal was used to focus sunlight, either for fire starting or for ritual purposes. Experiments have shown that under the right conditions, the lens can concentrate light to a small point. If this was intentional, it would suggest practical knowledge of optical properties. But the most intriguing and controversial interpretations go further. Some have proposed that the Nimrud lens might have been part of a more complex optical system. Over the years, speculative theories have suggested that ancient civilizations may have experimented with primitive telescopes or observational devices. These ideas remain outside mainstream scholarship. There is no direct evidence of telescopes or advanced optical instruments in Assyrian contexts, and most historians caution against projecting later scientific developments backward into the ancient world. Yet the question persists. If the crystal was intentionally shaped to magnify, then someone understood, at least empirically, how curved transparent materials affect light. And if such knowledge existed, how widespread was it? The ancient world was not unfamiliar with optical materials. Polished gemstones, glass objects, and reflective surfaces were used in decoration and ritual. Ancient Greek and Roman writers later described experiments with burning glasses and magnification effects. But the Nimrud lens predates much of this documented optical exploration. Was it an isolated experiment, a rare object produced by a skilled artisan, or part of a tradition that has left little trace? The context of its discovery adds another layer of uncertainty. The lens was found among a collection of objects without clear documentation of its original placement or function. Like many early archaeological finds, detailed contextual records were limited by the excavation methods of the time. This makes interpretation more difficult. Was it mounted? Held by hand? Part of a larger object now lost? Or simply a polished crystal valued for its appearance? Then there is the broader question of Assyrian craftsmanship. The empire was known for its technical skill, from large-scale engineering projects to intricate artistic production. Reliefs carved into palace walls depict detailed scenes of warfare, hunting, and daily life, rendered with remarkable precision. Some ivory carvings recovered from Nimrud feature extremely fine incisions, details that would have been difficult to execute without exceptional eyesight or some form of visual aid. Did artisans rely solely on natural vision? Or might tools like the lens have helped extend human perception? Even if the lens was used only occasionally, its existence suggests experimentation, an awareness that transparent materials could alter how the eye sees the world. And that awareness, however limited, marks an important step in the long history of optical understanding. The more speculative interpretations often reflect a larger question about ancient technology. How much practical knowledge did early civilizations possess that was never written down? Skills passed from master to apprentice, techniques discovered through experimentation, tools used within workshops but rarely preserved or recorded. The archaeological record tends to favor durable materials and monumental structures. Small tools, especially delicate ones, are easily lost. If objects like the Nimrud lens were rare, fragile, or made from perishable materials, most would never survive to be discovered. Today, the lens is preserved in a museum collection, its surface still catching and bending light as it did nearly 3,000 years ago. It does not reveal its purpose. It offers no inscription, no instruction, only a quiet demonstration of what it can do. Was it an ornament, admired for its clarity and beauty? A practical tool used by artisans to refine their work? A simple experiment with light and vision? Or a fragment of a larger, largely forgotten tradition of optical knowledge? The mystery of the Nimrud lens lies not in extraordinary claims, but in its ambiguity. It sits at the intersection of decoration and technology, curiosity and function, art and science. And perhaps that uncertainty reflects something essential about the ancient world. Knowledge did not always appear in textbooks or formal theories. Sometimes it existed in workshops, in experiments, in objects whose purpose was understood by their makers, but never recorded for history. Holding the crystal up to the light today, the effect is subtle but undeniable. The world shifts slightly. Details sharpen, edges move closer, a small change in perception. And it leaves us with a quiet but compelling question. If a single crystal from an Assyrian palace can still alter how we see the world, how many other small innovations, tools, techniques, experiments, once existed across ancient civilizations, shaping their abilities in ways we have only begun to rediscover? Somewhere among the fragments of the past, the history of human vision itself may still be waiting to come into focus. As the light of the Nimrud crystal reminded us, even the smallest objects can reshape our understanding of the ancient world. Sometimes a shift in perspective reveals hidden knowledge. Other times, it reveals something more elusive, entire places that seem to exist outside the expectations of history. From a polished lens that bends light, we now turn to a city that seems to bend time. In the far northern reaches of Jordan, where the desert stretches toward the horizon in waves of black stone, lies the silent settlement of el-Jimal. At first glance, the landscape feels almost otherworldly. There is no soft sand here, no golden dunes. Instead, the ground is covered in dark volcanic basalt, the hardened remains of ancient lava, flows that cooled thousands of years ago. The stone absorbs heat during the day and releases it slowly at night. The air feels heavy, the land feels old, and rising from this black terrain are hundreds of structures, houses, courtyards, towers, churches, and walls, all built from the same dark stone. No mortar holds many of them together. No timber supports their roofs. Yet many still stand. Some have stood for nearly 2,000 years. This is el-Jimal, often called the Black Oasis or the Town of Stone. And while its architecture is impressive, its greatest mystery is not how it was built. The mystery is how it lived, because by every conventional expectation, this place should never have supported a city at all. El-Jimal sits in a semi-arid region with little rainfall, limited vegetation, and no permanent river. There is no natural spring at the center of the settlement, no obvious water source that could sustain a large population. And yet, at its peak, the town may have housed several thousand people. Families lived here, farmers worked here, traders passed through, churches were built, expanded, and rebuilt over generations. Life flourished. How? The answer, according to mainstream archaeology, lies in water, though not in the way we usually imagine. Across the site, researchers have identified an extensive system of water collection and storage. Rainwater, though infrequent, was carefully captured from rooftops and courtyards, directed through channels, and stored in large underground cisterns. Some of these cisterns could hold tens of thousands of liters. Every drop mattered. The architecture itself was designed to conserve and manage water. Roofs sloped inward. Courtyards were paved to guide runoff. Walls were thick, reducing evaporation and protecting stored supplies from heat. In a landscape where rainfall might come only a few times a year, survival depended on planning, discipline, and community cooperation. And for centuries, it worked. But water management alone does not explain everything. Because el-Jimal was not just surviving, it was thriving. The earliest settlement here dates back to the Nabatean period, around the 1st century CE. The Nabateans, famous for their capital at Petra, were masters of desert adaptation and trade. They understood how to harness scarce resources and turn marginal environments into functioning urban centers. Later, the Romans incorporated the region into their empire. Roads were built, military outposts were established, trade routes connected el-Jimal to larger economic networks stretching across the Near East. Under Roman and later Byzantine control, the town grew significantly. Churches appeared, at least 15 of them, based on current archaeological evidence. Large homes with multiple stories were constructed. Watchtowers rose above the rooftops. Storage facilities suggest agricultural production and trade. This was not a temporary outpost. It was a permanent community. And yet, walking through el-Jimal today, one senses something unusual about its architecture. The buildings feel solid, almost heavy, but also strangely flexible in their design. Basalt is difficult to cut, heavy to move, and unforgiving to work with. Unlike limestone or sandstone, it does not lend itself easily to detailed carving. But the builders here developed techniques that turned this difficult material into an advantage. Roofs were constructed using long basalt beams, sometimes spanning entire rooms. Doors were made of thick stone slabs that pivoted on carved hinges. Upper floors rested on carefully balanced supports, distributing weight through walls that could withstand centuries of stress. In some structures, stone staircases still lead to upper levels that remain intact. No wood, no metal reinforcement, just stone. How did ancient builders achieve such precision with such a stubborn material? Trial and error, generations of accumulated knowledge, or techniques we only partially understand today? Some engineers who have studied the site note that certain roofing methods would be difficult and expensive to replicate with modern equipment, especially using traditional tools. And yet, here they stand, still aligned, still balanced, still holding. Then there is the question of time. El-Jimal was not abandoned suddenly. Evidence suggests that the town evolved over centuries, adapting to political changes, economic shifts, and environmental pressures. The Byzantine period, beginning in the 4th century CE, appears to have been a time of prosperity. Christianity spread throughout the region, and churches became central to community life. But by the early Islamic period, signs of decline begin to appear. Buildings were reused, materials were repurposed. Some areas were abandoned while others remained occupied. Then, sometime around the 8th century, the town was largely deserted. Why? The mainstream explanation points to a combination of factors: regional economic changes, shifting trade routes, earthquakes, and perhaps prolonged drought. Without consistent trade and support from larger political networks, maintaining such a resource-intensive settlement may simply have become too difficult. But some details remain unclear. There is no single catastrophic destruction layer across the site. No evidence of widespread burning, no signs of invasion. The town seems to have faded rather than fallen. And then there is what happened next. Unlike many ancient cities, el-Jimal was not heavily rebuilt in later centuries. Its remote location and harsh environment left it largely untouched. For over 1,000 years, the structures stood in silence, weathered but intact, empty but waiting. When modern explorers and archaeologists arrived, they found something rare. Not ruins reduced to foundations, but entire neighborhoods preserved in stone. Walking through the site today feels less like visiting an archaeological excavation and more like wandering through a city whose inhabitants stepped away only yesterday. Doors remain in place, rooms retain their shape, staircases lead upward into empty air. It is this level of preservation that has fueled more speculative interpretations. Some visitors describe the town as strangely intact for its age and exposure. The durability of the basalt construction has led to questions about whether the building techniques involved structural principles not fully documented in historical records. Others have pointed to the settlement's layout and water system as evidence of unusually advanced environmental engineering for its time. In more fringe discussions, the question is sometimes asked, could el-Jimal represent the remnants of knowledge inherited from earlier lost traditions of desert survival? There is no archaeological evidence to support such claims, but the persistence of these ideas reflects something real, the sense that the town operates on a level of practical intelligence that modern observers are only beginning to fully appreciate. Perhaps the greatest mystery of el-Jimal is not technological, but social, because none of its systems, water collection, construction, storage, agriculture, could have functioned without cooperation. Every household depended on shared infrastructure. Every roof contributed to communal water reserves. Every season required careful planning. This was not just a settlement. It was a coordinated survival system, and systems like that require stability, trust, shared knowledge. How was that knowledge transmitted across generations? How were resources allocated during drought years? What social structures ensured that no one disrupted the fragile balance? Written records from the town are limited. Most of what we know comes from architecture and material remains. The stones tell us how people lived, but not how they organized their lives, or how they made decisions when the rains failed, or what they feared, or what finally convinced them to leave. There is another quiet mystery here as well. The churches of el-Jimal are numerous, large, and carefully constructed. Religious life clearly played a central role. Some scholars have suggested that faith may have been a stabilizing force, providing meaning, cohesion, and resilience in a harsh environment. But what happens to belief systems when environmental pressures become overwhelming? Did the community interpret droughts or economic decline as spiritual tests? As punishment? As signs to move on? Or did the decision to leave come gradually, family by family, until the city simply emptied? Today, the wind moves freely through the streets. The basalt walls absorb the sun just as they did centuries ago. The cisterns remain, some still capable of holding water if the rains return. Nothing has collapsed into dust. Nothing has been erased. The city is still there, waiting, which raises a final, lingering question. If the people of el-Jimal mastered the art of surviving in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth, if they built a system that sustained life for centuries against the odds, what changed? Was it climate, economics, politics? If el-Jimal leaves us wondering why a community chose to walk away from a landscape it had mastered, the next mystery invites an even deeper question. What if the most important cities in human history were not abandoned in stone, but buried in memory? Just outside modern Amman, Jordan, beneath layers of earth and time, lies the site of Ain Ghazal, a place that challenges our understanding of how early civilization began. From the air, the landscape appears unremarkable. Low hills roll gently across the terrain. Seasonal streams cut shallow paths through the soil. Nothing rises dramatically from the ground. There are no towering ruins, no visible monuments, no stone walls breaking the horizon. And yet, beneath this quiet surface, once stood one of the largest human settlements on Earth. Nearly 9,000 years ago, long before the pyramids, long before Stonehenge, long before the first cities of Mesopotamia. At its height, around 7000 BCE, Ain Ghazal covered more than 30 acres and may have been home to several thousand people. For its time, it was not just a village. It was a population center of astonishing scale. But unlike later civilizations, Ain Ghazal left behind no palaces, no temples of stone, no written records. What it did leave behind is far stranger. The story of Ain Ghazal begins, like many archaeological discoveries, by accident. In 1974, construction workers building a highway uncovered traces of ancient structures. Excavations soon revealed the remains of mud brick houses, carefully arranged in clusters, with plastered floors and evidence of organized living spaces. These early inhabitants were part of the pre-pottery Neolithic bee culture, a transitional period when humans were shifting from hunting and gathering to farming and permanent settlement. They cultivated wheat and barley. They herded goats. They built homes designed to last. But what truly sets Ain Ghazal apart is not its size or its age. It is what the people buried beneath their floors. Inside several buildings, archaeologists found human skulls carefully removed from skeletons. The faces had been reconstructed using plaster, with shells placed in the eye sockets. The result is haunting. Smooth white faces, wide, unblinking eyes, expressions that seem neither alive nor dead. These plastered skulls are believed to represent ancestors, perhaps a form of ritual remembrance, a way of keeping the dead present among the living. But even this unusual practice is not the site's greatest mystery. That distinction belongs to the figures. In caches carefully buried beneath the settlement, archaeologists uncovered dozens of life-sized human statues made from lime plaster over reed frameworks. Some stand nearly 3 feet tall. Others are smaller, perhaps representing children. Their bodies are simplified, almost abstract, but their faces are strikingly detailed. Large eyes outlined in black, delicate features, and expressions that feel solemn, distant, almost aware. Many of the statues have 2 heads, no arms, no legs, just elongated forms, staring forward. Radiocarbon dating places these figures around 7000 BCE, making them some of the oldest large-scale human representations ever discovered. But who or what do they represent? Mainstream archaeology offers several possibilities. They may depict ancestors, similar to the plastered skulls. They may represent spirits, deities, or protective figures. They may have been used in communal rituals and then deliberately buried once their purpose was complete. The careful burial suggests intention, even reverence. But the emotional impact of the statues has led to deeper questions. Why do they look the way they do? Their eyes are unusually large and intense. Their proportions are elongated. Their expressions feel solemn, almost otherworldly. Some researchers suggest that the stylization reflects symbolic or spiritual ideas, an attempt to represent beings not as humans appear, but as they exist in the realm of belief. Others see something more psychological, the emergence of abstract thought, identity, and collective memory. But more speculative voices have proposed different interpretations. Could these figures represent visions, dreams, encounters with the unseen? Are they artistic imagination, or attempts to record something experienced? There is no evidence to support extraordinary claims. And yet, standing before these statues in a museum, many observers report the same reaction. They feel watched. They feel present. They feel intentional. And then there is the question of scale. Creating lime plaster in the Neolithic period was not a simple task. It required heating limestone to extremely high temperatures, over 700 degrees Celsius, to produce quicklime, then carefully processing it into workable plaster. This was energy-intensive and labor-heavy. Producing dozens of large statues would have required coordinated effort, planning, and significant resource investment. Why devote so much energy to objects that were meant to be buried? What role did they play that justified such effort? The answers may lie in the social complexity of Ain Ghazal itself. At its peak, the settlement was unusually large for its time, but population growth brought new challenges: resource pressure, environmental strain, and social tension. Archaeological evidence suggests that the surrounding landscape was gradually overused. Forests were cleared. Soil quality declined. Wild resources became scarce. Eventually, the settlement began to shrink. By around 6000 BCE, its population had dropped dramatically. Some researchers believe that the statue-making episodes correspond to periods of stress or transition, ritual attempts to reinforce social cohesion, identity, or spiritual protection during uncertain times. In this view, the figures were not art. They were anchors, symbols meant to hold a community together as the world around them changed. But there are still mysteries that resist simple explanation. The statues were not displayed permanently. They were used briefly, perhaps in ceremonies, and then buried in carefully prepared pits. Why hide them? Why not preserve them? Some anthropologists suggest that burial was part of their life cycle, that once a ritual object had served its purpose, it had to be returned to the earth. Others wonder whether the act of burial itself was the ritual. Creation, display, interment, a controlled passage from visibility into memory. There is also the unsettling fact that many of the statues were found broken before burial. Was this symbolic deactivation or something else? Then there is the broader mystery of Ain Ghazal's rise and decline. How did such a large community organize itself without writing, without centralized architecture, without obvious political hierarchy? How were decisions made? How were resources shared? How did they maintain social stability for centuries? And why, despite their apparent sophistication, did the system ultimately falter? Climate change is one possible factor. Evidence suggests a shift toward drier conditions around the time of the settlement's decline. Resource depletion is another. But some researchers believe the real challenge was social scale. Ain Ghazal may have grown faster than its social structures could adapt. Managing thousands of people without formal institutions may have created tensions that no amount of ritual could resolve. If that is true, then the statues might represent more than belief. They might represent a society struggling to hold itself together. Today, little remains visible at the site itself. The mud brick structures have eroded back into the earth. The landscape looks quiet, ordinary, almost empty. The most striking remnants now sit in museum galleries. Those pale faces with dark eyes staring forward across 9 millennia. They come from a time when cities were just beginning, when agriculture was new, when humans were learning how to live together in numbers never seen before. A time when identity, memory, and belief were being invented alongside architecture and farming. But the statues still refuse to fully explain themselves. Were they ancestors, spirits, symbols of unity, expressions of fear, attempts to communicate with forces beyond the visible world? Or were they something even more fundamental, early reflections of the human need to be remembered, to be seen, to exist beyond a single lifetime? At Ain Ghazal, one of humanity's earliest large communities, rose, struggled, adapted, and eventually faded. The houses returned to dust. The fields grew quiet. The people disappeared into history, but the faces remained, watching, waiting, and perhaps asking a question of their own. When our own civilizations are gone, and only fragments remain beneath the earth, what will our monuments say about what we believed? And will anyone, thousands of years from now, understand what we were trying to remember? If the silent faces of Ain Ghazal remind us how early societies tried to give form to memory, belief, and the unseen, our journey now moves north, into a landscape where faith, power, and mystery rose together on a hill overlooking time itself. In the fertile Jordan Valley, where green fields break the monotony of the surrounding highlands, the ancient city of Pella lies quietly among terraces of stone and earth. Known in antiquity as part of the Decapolis, Pella has witnessed thousands of years of human occupation. Neolithic farmers, Bronze Age traders, Hellenistic settlers, Roman citizens, Byzantine pilgrims. But above the city, separated from daily life by elevation and intention, stands one of its most intriguing features, the Upper Temple. From a distance, the site appears modest, a platform cut into the hillside, scattered with weathered stones, fragments of walls, and the faint outlines of ancient construction. Yet its position is unmistakably deliberate. It overlooks the entire settlement below, commanding a wide view of the valley and the distant mountains beyond. This was not a place of ordinary activity. This was a place meant to be seen. And perhaps a place meant to see. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Upper Temple complex dates back to the Bronze Age, around the 2nd millennium BCE, long before the later Greek and Roman phases of the city. At that time, Pella was already an important regional center, connected to trade routes that linked the Levant with Mesopotamia and Egypt. The temple complex consisted of a raised platform, enclosing walls, and a structure believed to have served ritual or ceremonial purposes. Nearby, archaeologists uncovered installations that may have been used for offerings, altars, basins, and areas containing ash and animal remains. These are familiar elements of ancient worship. But the mystery of the Upper Temple lies not in what was built. It lies in what happened to it. At some point during the late Bronze Age, the complex was violently destroyed. The evidence is unmistakable. Burn layers cover the site. Walls collapsed inward. Pottery and objects were found where they had fallen, frozen in the moment of catastrophe. And then, something unusual occurred. Instead of rebuilding immediately, something ancient cities often did after destruction, the area appears to have been deliberately abandoned for a period of time. Why would a sacred space, positioned so prominently and clearly valued, be left unused? Was the destruction the result of warfare? The late Bronze Age was a turbulent time, marked by regional conflicts and shifting powers. Or was the event something else? An earthquake, perhaps? The Jordan Valley sits within a seismically active region, and sudden structural collapse could match the archaeological evidence. Yet some researchers have suggested a more cultural explanation. In ancient societies, the destruction of a temple could be interpreted not simply as physical damage, but as a divine sign. If a sacred place was struck by disaster, burned, shattered, or defiled, it might be seen as rejected by the gods. In such cases, abandonment was not practical. It was ritual. Over time, the Upper Temple area was eventually reused, but the interruption remains part of its story. A pause in sacred continuity that hints at fear, uncertainty, or reverence for forces beyond human control. But the deeper mystery may lie in the temple's original purpose. Unlike later Greek or Roman temples, which often display clear architectural styles and dedicated deities, the Upper Temple offers fewer obvious clues. No inscriptions survive that name the god or gods worshipped there. No statues have been found that definitively identify its divine occupants. Instead, interpretation relies on context. The temple's elevated position suggests a connection to visibility, either to the heavens above or to the community below. Many ancient cultures placed their sacred spaces on high ground, symbolically closer to the divine. But there may be more to the placement than symbolism. From the Upper Temple, the horizon opens wide. Seasonal changes in sunlight, the movement of stars, and the shifting patterns of the landscape would have been clearly visible. Some archaeologists have wondered whether the temple's orientation had astronomical significance. Was it aligned with solstices or equinoxes? Did rituals coincide with seasonal transitions? Was the temple not only a place of worship, but a place of observation? There is no definitive proof, but the possibility reflects a broader pattern across the ancient world, where sacred architecture often merged spiritual belief with celestial awareness. Then there are the ritual remains themselves. Excavations uncovered layers of ash, animal bones, and broken vessels, evidence of repeated offerings over time. Some of the deposits appear carefully arranged, suggesting formal ceremonies rather than casual disposal. But among these layers are moments of abrupt interruption, deposits that stop suddenly, burn layers that do not match normal ritual fires, objects left unfinished or abandoned. What caused the rhythm of worship to break? Environmental stress? Political instability? Religious transformation? Or something more personal? Moments when the community believed the sacred order itself had been disrupted. The late Bronze Age collapse, which affected much of the eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BCE, may also play a role. Cities fell, trade networks collapsed, and entire cultural systems disappeared within a relatively short period. If the Upper Temple was active during this time, its destruction may reflect a larger regional crisis. But even after the Bronze Age, the hill retained its significance. Later inhabitants of Pella continued to use elevated areas for important structures, as if the memory of sacred space lingered, even when the original meaning had faded. This continuity raises another question. How much of sacred geography is practical, and how much is inherited? Did later builders know why the Upper Temple had once stood there? Or did they simply feel that the hill was important, without knowing why? Today, the Upper Temple site is quiet. Wind moves through grasses growing between the stones. The valley stretches below, much as it did thousands of years ago. There are no towering columns, no intact walls, no dramatic ruins, just outlines, foundations, traces of intention. And yet, the atmosphere of the place remains distinct. Standing there, it is easy to imagine gatherings at dawn, smoke rising from offerings, voices carried across the hillside, eyes turned upward, to the sky, the horizon, or something beyond both. The Upper Temple does not present a single mystery. Instead, it offers several smaller ones, layered together. What disaster destroyed it? Why was it left unused? Which deity, or force, was honored there? Were its builders watching the heavens, the land, or both? And how much of its meaning was lost even to the people who came after? Archaeology can reconstruct walls, date pottery, and analyze burn layers. But belief leaves fewer traces, and sacred places often hold meanings that never make it into the ground. At Pella, the hill still rises above the valley. The stones still mark where people once gathered to reach beyond the ordinary world. But the purpose behind their rituals, their fears, and their hopes remains only partially visible. Like the temple itself, emerging just enough from the earth to suggest a story that was never fully recorded. And as the wind moves across the Upper Temple's silent platform, one question remains. Was this hill chosen because it was sacred, or did it become sacred simply because for generations people believed something unseen was listening there? If the hilltop sanctuary at Pella reminds us how landscapes can hold memories of belief long after rituals have faded, our journey now turns to an object far smaller in scale, yet no less powerful. Not a temple, not a city, but a single stone. A monument carved with words, standing at the fragile boundary between history, identity, and interpretation. In the highlands east of the Dead Sea, the land rises into a rugged plateau of wind-shaped hills and scattered ruins. Here, in the 19th century, local villagers uncovered a dark basalt monument, broken but imposing, its surface covered in tightly carved lines of ancient script. This was the Moabite Stone, also known as the Mesha Stele. At first glance, it is simple, just over a meter tall, rounded at the top, its surface worn by time. But as light moves across the stone, the letters begin to emerge. Rows of carefully incised characters fill the face from top to bottom. The language is ancient. The message, unmistakably deliberate. This was not a memorial to the dead. This was a declaration. The inscription dates to the 9th century BCE and records the words of King Mesha of Moab, a ruler who describes his victories, his building projects, and his devotion to the god Chemosh. According to the text, Moab had once been under the control of a neighboring kingdom, but later rose in rebellion. Mesha presents himself as the chosen instrument of his god, reclaiming cities and restoring national independence. In many ways, the stone reads like royal propaganda, common in the ancient Near East. Kings recorded their triumphs, credited their gods, and shaped their legacy in stone. But the Moabite stone is different, because its story did not end in the 9th century BCE. It nearly disappeared in the 19th. When European scholars first learned of the monument in the 1860s, they recognized its importance immediately. The script was closely related to ancient Hebrew, and the text described events also referenced in later historical traditions. But before the stone could be safely removed, conflict broke out among local groups who feared it might be taken away permanently. In an attempt to divide its value, or perhaps prevent its removal, the monument was deliberately broken into pieces and exposed to fire and cold water, causing it to fracture. For a moment, the inscription that had survived nearly 3,000 years seemed lost. Fragments were scattered, some disappeared, others were collected slowly, piece by piece. Fortunately, before the destruction, a paper impression, known as a squeeze, had been made of the surface. This fragile record would later allow scholars to reconstruct much of the original text. Today, the Moabite stone exists both as a restored artifact and as a puzzle, its surviving pieces assembled like a memory reconstructed after damage. But the physical survival of the stone is only part of its mystery. The deeper questions lie in the words themselves. The inscription provides one of the earliest known examples of a local ruler describing events from his own perspective, independent of the major empires that usually dominate ancient records. It offers a rare glimpse into the political and religious world of a smaller kingdom, asserting identity, independence, and divine favor. Yet the narrative raises questions. Royal inscriptions rarely admit defeat. They rarely include uncertainty. They present victory as inevitable and divinely ordained. How much of Mesha's account reflects historical reality? How much reflects political messaging? Archaeology confirms that Moab existed and that regional conflicts occurred during this period. But the exact sequence of events remains debated. Some cities mentioned in the inscription have been identified. Others remain uncertain. Timelines do not always align perfectly with other sources. The stone tells a story, but it is one voice among many that no longer survive. Then there is the question of language. The script on the Moabite stone is remarkably similar to early Hebrew, sharing vocabulary, grammar, and structure. This has led scholars to see it as part of a broader cultural and linguistic landscape across the region. But the similarities also blur boundaries. Where did one culture end and another begin? How distinct were these ancient identities? Were political divisions sharper than cultural ones? The stone suggests a world of close connections, shared writing traditions, related languages, and overlapping religious concepts, despite the conflicts described in its text. And then there are the lines that remain uncertain. Because the stone was broken, some sections are incomplete. Scholars rely on reconstruction, comparison, and educated inference to fill the gaps. In one damaged line, traces of letters have sparked decades of debate. Some researchers believe the fragment may reference a royal dynasty known from other traditions. Others argue the reading is too uncertain to support such conclusions. A few missing strokes, a partial word, and suddenly, interpretations of regional history can shift. This raises a quiet but profound question about ancient evidence. How much of what we believe about the past depends on fragments, on reconstruction, on the assumption that missing pieces would confirm what we expect? The Moabite stone is often celebrated as a rare point where archaeology and written tradition intersect. but it also reminds us how fragile that intersection can be. There is another layer of mystery as well. The monument was originally erected in a public place, likely a temple or central location where people could see it. It was meant to be read, or at least recognized, by the population. But literacy in the ancient world was limited. So who was the audience? Priests? Officials? Travelers from neighboring regions? Or was the true audience not human at all? Ancient royal inscriptions often served a symbolic purpose, declaring loyalty and gratitude to the gods, preserving the king's achievements for divine witness across time. If so, the Moabite stone was less a historical record than a permanent offering, a message meant to endure beyond the lifetime of the kingdom itself, and in a way, it succeeded. Long after Moab disappeared as a political power, long after its cities fell silent, the stone remained, buried, broken, forgotten, until it spoke again. Today, the reconstructed monument stands in a museum, its dark surface still carrying the voice of a king who lived nearly 3 millennia ago. Visitors read translations, scholars debate interpretations, historians place it within broader narratives. Yet the stone itself offers no clarification. It does not explain what was lost when it was broken. It does not confirm which reconstructions are correct. It does not reveal the full political reality behind its confident claims. It simply preserves one version of events, one perspective, one carefully carved memory of power, faith, and survival. And perhaps that is the enduring mystery of the Moabite stone, not whether its words are true or exaggerated, but how many other stones once stood across the ancient landscape, voices of forgotten kings, rival accounts, alternative histories, that were never buried carefully enough to be found again. If this single monument can reshape our understanding of an entire region, what stories have already disappeared? And beneath the soil of the ancient world, how many more voices still wait, silent, incomplete, and powerful enough to change the past the moment they are uncovered?